like a banner into battle. Bran Wynn. Summary. Doran, ruling Prince of Dorne, arrives in King's Landing to discuss the proposed betrothal of his son Prince Tristan to the king's sister, Princess Myrcella. His entourage arrives at the doors of the throne room just in time to see Meryn Trant tear Sansa Stark's gown open and beat her with his sword. Notes. See the end of the work for notes and other works inspired by this one. Chapter 1. Chapter text. Sansa. Sansa knew that something was happening behind her in the throne room, something that had nothing to do with her. Joffrey's face was white as a ghost, and all the little noises that had tittered through the room after Sir Meryn drove his fist into her stomach, the whispers, muffled shrieks, even the giggles, were falling silent. Sansa was sprawled across the floor and she could not have looked away from Joffrey's face had she wanted to. She scarcely cared what was happening elsewhere. Her life and death lay in Joffrey's next words. Something was wrong with her, she could barely breathe, and she did not think she could walk. Her back was cold where Sir Meryn had torn her gown open. The welts laid down by the flat of his sword burned against her thighs and back like wildfire. Suddenly, there was movement nearby, and Sansa realized she was probably making a spectacle of herself as people tried to move past her. But it scarcely mattered. If Sansa was in the way of some lord's stately progress, they were simply going to have to step over her or drag her aside. Or perhaps Joffrey would just make an end of her with his crossbow. His mother would be displeased if Sansa died, but for all the Queen's treachery, she had not wanted Sansa's father beheaded, either. Joffrey did what he liked in the end. He'd proven that by now. Your Grace, my lords, ladies. The seneschal's voice rang through the throne room, clear as a bell against the hushed silence. Doran Martell, ruling Prince of Dorne, is come to renew his oaths of fealty to his Grace the King. Along with his retainers. Sansa gasped quietly, forcing herself up to her knees. The Prince of Dorne, Septa Mordane's voice seemed hiss in her ear, on your feet, girl, you must curtsy. But before Sansa could do more than plant her hands on the floor, there was a strong hand at her elbow, pulling her upright. She nearly flinched, certain it was Sir Meryn again, but when she blinked the tears out of her eyes she found herself face to chest with an unfamiliar suit of armor, copper scales that glinted in the sunlight streaming through the windows. She looked up further and saw the face of a handsome young man. His mouth was tipped up at the corners in a sympathetic smile, but something hard and angry burned in his eyes. Come along, he whispered. We must make way for my prince. Sansa scarcely heard Joffrey beginning to make some elaborate apology for the scene at the foot of his throne, my betrothed wife, you know, in need of correction, nor did she hear much of Prince Doran's reply, though his low and gracious tones were just audible from behind the hangings of his palanquin chair, which was held at waist level by 4 knights. The other Dornish knight, the one was supporting most of Sansa's weight against his arm, began to lead her towards the exit leading from the throne room beneath the gallery. Sansa mustered the strength to glance back towards the palanquin before she was out of view. There, propped upon cushions, she saw a thin man with dark hair, streaked in silver. His cool black eyes lit on her for only the briefest of moments before turning their dark light once more onto the king. Sansa shuddered, and as soon as she had passed through the doors of the throne room she grasped for the wall, freezing and numb and unable to take another step. The knight at her side muttered a curse under his breath and barked an order at a man standing at attention in the corridor, another Dornish knight, distinctive by the orange cloth wound round his helm. Sansa thought both knights angry with her at first, and it would have frightened her more if she hadn't already been so sick with fear. But the second knight only marched up to them and removed his orange cloak. The first knight, the handsome one, covered Sansa with it, so that neither her corset nor the bloody welts on her shoulders were exposed to the open air. Sansa could have wept for gratitude, but they were strangers here, they did not know. So she whispered, the king will not thank you for this. Nor will he thank your prince. The knight smiled at her again, and this time his eyes were warm. It was Prince Doran sent me, he said. May I escort you to chambers? Sansa was not certain how she would make it back to her chambers without help, but she was afraid of this Dornish knight, for all his gallantry. She did not know him, and he did not know that she was but a traitor's daughter. Who was to say that he would not become angry with her when he learned that he'd wasted his time courting the favor of a girl whose favors were worth less than nothing? The knight waited for her answer, but as the moment dragged on he seemed to arrive at a decision of his own. "Forgive me, my lady," he said, "but truly, I do not think you have the strength to go anywhere under your own power just now. I must carry you. Please do not be alarmed. On my honor, I shall take no liberties." So saying, he placed an arm under her legs and swept her off her feet so suddenly that Sangza had no choice but to wind her arms around his neck, or else fall. Nor did she have any chance about crying out at the sudden pain. In all the places he was gripping her most tightly, the welts from Sammarin's sword were burning their hottest. Miserable, humiliated, she felt the tears soaking her cheeks, but the Dornish knight did not laugh at her or drop her again. Instead, he made a soft, soothing noise of apology under his breath and adjusted his grip, until his arms were no longer pressing into the welts on her thighs or her back. Are you certain your prince does not require you to attend him?" Sangza managed to ask once she had got her breath back. One of her maids, the one who had tittered loudest when Sammarin knocked the wind from her, Sangza remembered, was leading the way back to Sangza's chambers, but she seemed to be taking them the long way. "On the contrary, my lady," said the knight. "I am certain that I am precisely where my prince requires me to be." His strides were long and confident, as though she weighed no more to him than one of the straw knights the master-at-arms used to train the boys in the yard. "You do not know who I am," she protested, her voice feeble, though her urgency gave her strength. "You do not understand. The king does not permit me to receive such attentions." "I serve Prince Doran," said the knight, and though his tone was not harsh, it forbade further argument. "And he knows who you are, Lady Sangza." Sangza did not have the strength to argue with him further. He was kind, she thought, and she only hoped he would not come to any harm on her account. Her maids, the queen's spies, one and all, were watching him closely, their eyes alight with curiosity, even envy. Let them take a beating from Meryn Trant, Sangza thought viciously. Then they would learn whether the attentions of even the handsomest Dornish knights are sufficient recompense. When they reached her chambers at last, the maids opened the door for them, and the Dornish knight carried Sangza all the way to her bed, depositing her gently against the pillows. Before she could thank him, or even speak to him, he turned towards the senior of her maids, and told her to send for a maester. "Sir," the maid exchanged nervous looks with the other girls. "The king does not, that is, he has never before given instructions." Even though Sangza was beginning to feel light-headed, she could sense the anger in the knight's silence. "Sir, I will be well enough," she called to him quietly. "I thank you for your kind service. May I know the name of the one to whom I am so obliged?" The knight continued to stare at the maids a moment longer before turning back to Sangza. "I am Sir Demon Sand, the bastard of God's grace, my lady," he said, bowing. "And there is no obligation. I did no more than my duty." He bowed again, a little more briefly, to her ladies, before departing the room at a swift clip. Some 10 or 20 minutes later, after Sangza had nearly fallen asleep, there came a knock at her door. When the maid answered it, a young man in maester's robes and chain entered. "Lady Sangza." He bowed. "I am Maester Miles, I have come to tend to your injuries." There was a small casket in his hands, of the kind Maester Lewin once used to keep his ointments and potions. Sangza kept her eyes trained on the casket, and avoided looking at her maids. "The king was most kind to send you," she said, though even as she said it, she knew that Joffrey had nothing to do with his being here. The maester arched an eyebrow and began unpacking his casket on her bedside table. "Prince Doran sent me, my lady. The king is, otherwise occupied, or no doubt you would be receiving the benefits of his maester's attentions." Sangza struggled to sit up. Bad enough that she had been whisked from Joffrey's presence without his leave. This could lead to far more serious consequences. "Prince Doran is most attentive," she said. "But I beg you," I tried to tell Sir Demon, "if the king hears of it." "That is not my concern, my lady," said the master, his tones brisk. "I am bound to obey Prince Doran's commands. Drink this, please." Sangza knew it was milk of the poppy, and sensing that she would have no more luck repelling this maester than she had had in repelling Sir Demon, she chose to drink it straight down. Whatever he was about to do to her, it was bound to be painful, and she would just as soon sleep through it. "I will leave more for the morning," the maester said, noting the expression of relief on her face as the potion spread numbing hands over all her hurt places. Thank you, Sansa whispered, even as she collapsed back onto the bed. Please give Prince Doran my gratitude as well. I shall, my lady. Chapter 2. Chapter text. Sansa was stiff when she woke the next morning, but she could walk, which made a considerable difference since the last time Joffrey had. Still, grateful though she was to be able to hobble to the privy and back on her own, she returned to bed immediately afterwards. At noon, she rose to bathe and eat a little, but it wasn't until nightfall, when her maids had been sent to their supper, that she felt able to leave her rooms and go for a walk in the gardens. Her walks were the only thing that relieved the tedium of her days in this place, where she was no longer permitted to so much as embroider or play the harp. It was just as well that it was dark when she stepped out of doors. There was no grace in the way she moved. She limped, rather than glided, and more than once the toe of her slippers caught on the hem of her dress. She decided to take a seat on the first bench she came to, though it was not nearly as removed from the promenade as she would have wished. She would have preferred above all to go to the Godswood, where no one ever spoke to her or even looked at her, but such a walk was impossible in her condition. Sansa sat with her hands folded respectably in her lap and kept her eyes trained on the cobbles, her loose hair falling like shields on either side of her face. She had been sitting there about 20 minutes when a pair of leathern sandals stepped into view. My lady. Sansa looked up, to find Sir Daemon smiling down on her once more. I hope I find you in better health and spirits today. Yes, Sir Daemon, she said, because it was not a lie. Of course, she would have said the same even if it had been a lie. My thanks for your inquiries. And for the Maester. That was very kind of you. The Maester might have come to her with Prince Doran's leave, but she had no doubt that it was the knight who informed the prince that her wounds would receive no care from the king. Sir Daemon shook his head dismissively. I know that the hour is late, Lady Sansa, but Prince Doran has sent me to request the honor of a visit from you. Might I escort you to him? He keeps to his rooms while he recovers from the long journey from Dorne. All at once, Sansa felt faint again, this time for apprehension. I am a member of the Queen's own household, she said, hearing the strain in her own voice. Without her leave, I am not permitted. Prince Doran inquired with the hand of the king earlier, and he gave permission. Does that allay your fears? Sansa swallowed. The Queen and Lord Tyrion had no love of one another, it was well known. But while his father was away, Lord Tyrion seemed to do as he liked. And he had been kind to Sansa in the past, perhaps he would keep this visit a secret from the Queen. If my Lord Hand has approved it, I can see no objection, said Sansa carefully. I would certainly be loath to refuse an invitation from the Prince of Dorne. Sansa stood up rather awkwardly, she had to brace her hand on the bench, and she wobbled when she got to her feet. But Sir Daemon seemed to sense the trouble instantly, and no sooner was Sansa upright than she found her arm tucked tightly into his. She had no choice but to lean heavily against him as he led the way to the prince's chambers, but it made the pain far easier to bear. Sir Daemon knocked twice at the prince's door, then entered, as if he was expected. Sansa peered past him to see that a large round table of polished oak sat in the midst of a room that was otherwise mostly bare, save for a few chairs and a cushioned chaise that looked as though it belonged more properly to some lady's boudoir. The man Sansa had glimpsed in the palanquin yesterday was now seated near the window in a chair the likes of which Sansa had never seen. It was as large as a throne, and at either side were fastened two large wheels wrought of iron and ebony. The prince grasped the wheels with both hands, and in so doing, turned the chair round to face the door. Lady Sansa. He smiled. Thank you, Daemon, you may leave us. Sir Daemon bowed and left, shutting the doors behind him. It was Sansa's turn to curtsy now, but without Sir Daemon's arm to cling to, there was a good chance she would stumble. But before Sansa could make a move, Prince Doran had rolled his chair across the room, until he was close enough to extend her his hand. Sansa's heart fluttered in her chest, but she offered her own hand and tried not to blush when the prince brushed his lips over the back of it. It was very good of you to come and see me, said Prince Doran, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. I know it is scarcely regular for a prince to invite a maiden to dine with him alone at such an hour, but we shall be well chaperoned, I assure you. In truth, I have been awaiting the opportunity of speaking with you all day, but Daemon tells me that you only recently left your chambers. Yes, my prince, that is so. I was resting. Yes, I imagine you were. Prince Doran's expression was both thoughtful and gentle, as though he wished to put Sangza at her ease. My maester tells me that your injuries are more likely to prove painful than severe, though he had some concerns about your rib. Her rib, where Sumerian drove his fist into her stomach. Sangza's hand grazed over the bruise automatically. It does not pain me so much today, my prince, she said quickly, because of course she could say nothing else. Prince Doran glanced over at the chaise, which had been pulled up alongside the table. An extra layer of thick cushions had been arranged atop it, and the prince indicated it with a wave of his hand. Will you be seated? I have ordered a light supper, which should be served shortly. Not knowing what else to do, Sangza arranged herself amongst the cushions silently. It was obvious to her now that the chaise had been brought to this room on purpose for her use, so that she could sit without too much discomfort. She didn't know what to make of so much thoughtfulness. It was all of a piece with Prince Doran's attentions to her yesterday, though, Sir Demon and the maester, and she knew that she should be nothing but grateful. But she had been in the Red Keep long enough to understand that every kindness, every courtesy, came with a price attached, and Sangza knew so little of the Prince of Dawn that she could not begin to imagine what he could want of her in exchange for all of this. Her uncertainty made her feel anxious and suspicious, and she hated that. She would so much rather have looked at the prince as a friend and opened her heart to him, as she had not dared to do with anyone since her father's death. I scarcely know how to thank you for your many kind attentions, my prince, she said, choosing her words carefully. All her life she had been told that courtesy was a lady's armor, but she had not fully understood the truth of it until recently. When one spoke in courtesies, and only in courtesies, it was like speaking an entirely new language, with pitfalls for the unwary in every phrase. I must confess, I do not know what I have done to deserve your notice. Prince Doran waved a hand, and there was a merry glint in his eye suddenly that made him seem younger, almost young enough to seem handsome. He was older than her father, and she could tell that he was ill enough to make use of a palanquin and a rolling chair, and there were deep lines, scored by grief or pain, alongside his mouth and his eyes. But as a young man, he must have been quite fetching, and there was so much energy and intelligence in his features that it was hard to look away from them, even now. Many years ago, your father performed a great service for my family, Prince Doran said. That will suffice should the king or queen demand explanations from you. I see. Sangza pleated her skirt between her fingers. She could not recall her father ever mentioning such a service to House Martell. Was there some other reason as well? Prince Doran smiled, and the light in his eyes became soft and sad. Kindness needs no reason, he said, a note of dismissal in his voice. I would ask you a personal question, Lady Sangza. My maester is of the opinion that the incident I witnessed yesterday was not the first of its nature. How could he know that? He's hardly been here a day, Sangza thought, and then she realized. Some of the older welts must have become scars, the maester must have seen them as he dressed her wounds. Sangza had feared as much, listening to her maids whisper when they attended her in the bath, but she had never tried to catch a glimpse in a looking glass. Now she knew for certain. Her shame was permanent. Any man she married, supposing Lord Tyrion ended her betrothal to Joffrey and found her another husband, as he'd once promised, would know how she came by them, or would have to be told. And how will your husband like that? A voice whispered in her ear, having a bride not only disgraced, but disfigured. It was not the first time, my prince, Sangza whispered. But, truly, the king has his reasons. The prince shook his head. I heard the king's excuses yesterday. You need make none for him. Sangza was spared from having to decide how to answer a remark like that, which Joffrey would have considered borderline treasonous, when the doors opened again, and two maids holding platters of food and wine. They were followed, a few paces behind, by none other than Lord Tyrion. Sangza stiffened and caught her breath. Prince Doran. Tyrion bowed. I seem to have arrived on the very, Lady Sangza. He gawked at her for a moment, before offering a belated bow. Forgive me, my lady, I had not thought. My prince, have I mistaken the hour of our meeting? No, my lord Hand. I wished for Lady Sangza to take part in our discussions this evening. Please be seated. Prince Doran waved Tyrion towards the table. Sangza watched discreetly as Tyrion took the place the prince had indicated for him, and saw that his chair, like Sangza's, had also been specially selected. The seat was high, with 2 rungs like a ladder on the sides, so that Tyrion would not be at a disadvantage due to his height. Nor would he be reduced to the indignity of having to sit on a box, or on a stack of books. The implication was not lost on Tyrion, Sangza realized, and she saw that Tyrion was also looking at Sangza's cushioned chaise, and the prince's rolling chair. All 3 seats had been positioned around the circular table in a triangle formation, so that all 3 of them had a good view of the other 2. It is as if we are all equals here in the sight of dawn, Sangza realized, and there was something in that realization which made her feel afraid and thrilled at the same time. All 3 of them, Prince of Dawn, King's Hand, and disgraced traitor's daughter, sat quietly while the maids arranged platters and jugs around the table. The foods were unlike any Sangza had ever eaten: flatbreads with soft white cheese applied with a trowel, chickpea paste, roasted peppers and sauces, chunks of lamb on skewers. Tyrion did not hesitate to help himself, but he seemed to be familiar with these dishes. Prince Doran, on the other hand, served Sangza personally, helping her to what seemed to be the choicest portions of each dish. It had been a long time since Sangza was honored thus as dinner, and she had to blink rapidly to keep tears at bay. "Allow me to say again how very good of you it was to travel all this way from Dawn, my prince," said Tyrion, when all their plates were full. "It must have been a taxing journey. Your letter took me by surprise. A most kingly offer, the hand of your own sweet niece Princess Myrcella, for my son Prince Tristan." Sangza froze with her hand on the cheese trowel. No one in the court knew of this. Sangza was fairly certain the queen did not know it. And if she learned of it from Sangza, or worse, if she learned of it later, and discovered that Sangza had not told her. "Naturally, I felt that such an offer deserved my personal attention," the prince continued, his eyes flickering ever so briefly towards Sangza. "And it seemed to me as well that other matters might be arranged to our mutual satisfaction, were I present to see them through." "I see," said Tyrion, filling his wine goblet. He tapped his finger against the rim for a moment. "I hear curious tidings of your elder son, Prince Quentyn. He is traveling, is he not? And has been, for some time." Sangza sensed the tension that followed Tyrion's comment, but she did not where it was coming from. Was it not common knowledge that Prince Quentyn was away from Dawn? Was this some test, coming from Lord Tyrion? The more time Sangza sat at this table, the less certain she was that she ought to be here. Why had the prince requested her presence? Her appetite had not been strong to begin with, the milk of the poppy had that effect on the stomach sometimes, and now she could not bring herself to take another bite. Yes, his mother returned to her birthplace in Essos some years ago, and Quentyn proposed that he visit her, to learn more of his mother's people. Prince Doran seemed utterly placid. If his son's whereabouts had been a secret, it seemed not to perturb him that Tyrion knew of them. Quentyn will return in time, all the wiser for his journeying, it is to be hoped. He smiled. And when he returns, he will be in need of a wife. Sangza said nothing, but her stomach sank. This, then, was why she had been invited to share a meal with the Prince of Dawn and the Hand of the King. There was no reason why Prince Doran would make mention of his son's needing a wife unless Sangza was the wife he had in mind. But that did not mean that her opinion, or even her reaction, was wanted. Sangza had no say in how the crown disposed of her hand. Whatever was decided for her, she would have no choice but to obey, and act as though she were grateful. So why did Prince Doran care whether she was present? Tyrion darted a sharp glance at Sangza and looked back towards Prince Doran. "Is it known when Prince Quentyn will return from his travels?" he asked, his tone delicate. Prince Doran sighed, a father's sigh of exasperation, Sangza thought, but at least partly feigned. He is of that age when a father's opinion means but little. Sometimes he writes that he will be with us again in a month, other times that he means to take ship to Teos or Pentos. I would not have you think him undutiful, however. I have never yet pressed him to return. If I am to do so, I think it only right to offer him the proper reward as incentive." "Me? I'm the reward?" Sangza's stomach curdled, and she hoped she would not need to excuse herself hastily for the privy. "That would seem only fitting," said Tyrion. However, in offering your younger son the hand of Princess Myrcella, I seem to have exhausted House Baratheon's supply of eligible young maidens. Unless Prince Quentin's travels have whetted his taste for a more mature bride, in which case, my sister is Queen Regent, and I do not think that any consideration could tempt her to leave her son's side while he is still so young. I should never dream of parting a mother from her children, said Prince Doran, so smoothly that Sansa could almost believe for a moment that he honestly regretted that Queen Cersei could not marry Prince Quentin. But House Baratheon shelters another maiden, of an age much nearer to my son's. Not a daughter, perhaps, but a fosterling. A hostage. Sansa's voice was so hoarse, and the word leapt from her tongue so unexpectedly, that she didn't realize at first that the silence spreading through the room was her doing. Then she looked up, and saw Prince Doran's dark, calculating eyes upon her, and realized what she had just said. She started down at her plate with furious concentration and did everything in her power now to burst into tears. "Forgive me," Sansa whispered. "I should not have." "No, you probably shouldn't," said Prince Doran, the corners of his lips tipped up in a tiny smile. "But you're not wrong, either. Lady Sansa is a hostage in King's Landing, Lord Tyrion, but despite the fondest hopes of your sister the Queen, Robb Stark has refused to trade her for Sir Jaime." The prince's smile vanishes. "Tell me truly, Lord Tyrion, has your sister not considered sending King Robb Lady Sansa's head in a basket?" Sansa was completely still. So still, so small, no one had no reason to notice her. She might as well be a ghost. She was insubstantial. "My nephew, and even my sister, may sometimes forget themselves." Tyrion's voice was sharp. "But in the eyes of the crown, Lady Sansa is innocent of wrongdoing." "There is no such talk. But the crown does not protect Lady Sansa when the king abuses her for his amusement." There was an answering coolness in Prince Doran's tone. "It seems to me that there is a difference of opinion, in your family, regarding Lady Sansa's innocence." "Perhaps there is," said Tyrion. "But I would remind you that Lady Sansa is still, technically, betrothed to the king. I have been searching for alternate arrangements since the death of Lord Stark, but nothing suitable has yet presented itself. Lady Sansa is either the daughter of a traitor and a hostage of war, or she is the betrothed of the king." Prince Doran leaned forward in his chair slightly. "It seems to me that you are attempting to treat her as though she were both. This is bound to lead to confusion. And you believe that by marrying Lady Sansa to Prince Quentin we will resolve this confusion?" Prince Doran tapped his fingernail on the table. "I believe that it might satisfy the Queen's warlike nature, if it were pointed out to her that the Lady Sansa is niece to the woman who persuaded my own good brother, Prince Rhaegar, to abandon my sister Elia, to the destruction of her whole family." He shrugged. "Queen Cersei might not like it, but she should understand as well as anyone that House Martell has first rights to any hostage of Eddard Stark's bloodline." Sansa had been breathing slowly, softly, ever since she had spoken out of turn moments before. Now, as she watched a look of dawning comprehension settle over Lord Tyrion's face, and saw him nod, quietly, she stopped breathing entirely. After all, there no longer seemed much point. Chapter 3. Chapter text. Voices faded in and out of Sansa's hearing as she swayed on her chaise, her vision greying around the edges. There was a nearly empty goblet of watered wine in her hand. She could feel it begin to slip from her fingers, but she could do nothing about it. "And any man of suitable rank and character is free to request the honor of her hand, but I will not trade her like chattel." That was Lord Tyrion, sounding strangely angry, Sansa thought. "When Tywin Lannister comes to resume King Joffrey's service you may find that there is less you can do to protect her." Prince Doran's voice was cool. It had never been anything other than cool, like water, like the condensation dripping down Sansa's goblet and onto her hand. Tyrion snorted. "Never heard me call a sheep white without naming it black. 'Tis true enough." Sansa's head was spinning. She could feel a faint prickle, like the pins and needles she sometimes got in her arm when she slept, except it was forming like a cluster of mild bee stings just between her eyes. Lord Tyrion had been kind to her, since his first day in King's Landing, when he had sought her out and expressed his condolences on her father's death. Sansa had been suspicious. She could scarcely be otherwise. He was a Lannister, but she had trusted him, a little bit, ever since then. She was a fool. She had come to King's Landing a fool, and she hadn't learned at all, she'd learned nothing. Lady Sangza. Suddenly there was a hand gripping her shoulder, a strong grip, a hand with thin, wiry fingers that felt immovable as stone. She found herself leaning into it without meaning to. Only then did she realize that she was nearly listing out of her chair. Prince Doran had moved his chair closer to hers. The strength of his arm was all that was keeping her upright. Sangza pressed a hand to her forehead, tried to breathe deeply, regain her composure, but she could not take deep breaths. Every time she tried, the bruise over her stomach where Sumerian had struck her stabbed like a knife's blade. "My lady, I have been forgetting your injuries. It was unpardonable of me. Please, will you lie down? As it happens, the Maester left more potion for me to send with you, to take before bed. You shall have some now." Sangza had no choice but to allow Lord Tyrion, who had popped off his chair swiftly and now stood at her back, hands close to her shoulders, to draw her gently backwards until her head rested on the bolster of the chaise. Her vision still fuzzy, she looked at Prince Doran, but though she opened her lips she could force no words through them. The prince's eyes softened, and then he reached for his belt. Sangza cringed, thinking he was about to unsheath his dagger, but only reached into his pocket, from which he produced a small vial and a tiny spoon. Strange, Sangza thought, that though Prince Doran kept to a chair and travelled on a litter, it had never occurred to her that he might be too feeble to hurt her. She wondered if that was because she was so useless, or if Prince Doran was truly more dangerous than he tried to seem. The prince measured 3 drops of thick potion into the spoon. He mixed it with the small quantity of watered wine that remained in the bottom of Sangza's goblet, and then sat there, giving Lord Tyrion a very long look. Eventually, she felt Lord Tyrion's hands leave her shoulders. "Drink," said Prince Doran, holding the goblet close to Sangza's lips. His voice was kindly, but with the sort of authority that would brook no refusals. "I blame myself for this entirely. I should not have troubled you for your company until you had many more days to rest from your ordeal. I fear there was not the time." Sangza didn't blame Prince Doran for anything. He was a little like a Maester and a little like she'd thought Joffrey was, when they first met, commanding, accustomed to people doing as he told them, but only in the most gallant of ways when it came to her. Gallant or no, Sangza was just glad he was telling her what to do. She had come here at his invitation, embarrassed herself at his dinner table in front of Lord Tyrion, who was his guest. She preferred that he give her commands to obey, at least then she could do no wrong and no one would be angry with her. Not here in this room, at least. If the Queen learned that she had been reclining on a chaise in the Prince of Dawn's personal quarters, Sangza was sure the Queen would brand her a whore so loudly the name would stay with her all her life. Sangza drank the watered wine and potion in a single gulp. It tasted bitter, and though she would not have complained, the next cup that Prince Doran held to her lips contained sweet honey lemon water. She enjoyed lemon water very much, and though she had not been able to eat much she had drunk 2 tumblers full of the water already. Prince Doran had noticed, embarrassing though. But the bright taste of the lemons scoured the bitterness from the back of her throat. She managed to give the prince a small smile of thanks. As soon as Prince Doran turned the wheels of his chair back twice, Lord Tyrion took his place, looking hard into Sangza's features. Even as the potion spread in a warm wave throughout her body, causing her shoulders to slump visibly, Sangza though he was making a peculiar face. There was something angry, soft, longing, and helpless in his features all at once. He did not know about what Joffrey did yesterday, Sangza realized. Or at least, they had told him it was no more than a mild whipping. Maybe he'd heard rumors of worse and dismissed them as exaggerations. Maybe he'd been told it wasn't the first time, and dismissed it as too sickening to think about. By the time Lord Tyrion looked at Prince Doran again, some of his previous hostility had disappeared from his face. "In light of the political unrest sweeping Westeros, I imagine," he said, "that it would be a great relief to your fatherly feelings, and to Dorne, to have both your sons married suitably to wives of high rank." "Yes, that it certainly would be," said Prince Doran. "A father reaches a certain age when he wishes for nothing more than to see his children's happiness assured." Lord Tyrion was now sitting on the end of the chaise, in the space Sangza's feet did not reach, so the triangle the 3 of them formed was now much smaller. Her feet might have reached, had she not been keeping her knees curled up to her chest. She wondered what Lord Tyrion would do if she kicked him by accident. "Uncles reach that age too," said Tyrion, though in my case, that age has been brought on prematurely by Stannis Baratheon and his threatened siege. It would be a great relief to my family to know that Princess Myrcella was safe in Dorne as soon as may be. Tyrion cleared his throat, not looking at Sansa. The crown would be equally relieved to see Lady Sansa safely bestowed among friends before danger reached the gates of our city. The crown. No, not the crown. Only Lord Tyrion. But Sansa saw no need to say so. She didn't know why Lord Tyrion cared for her at all. If she mentioned it, he might stop. And it would be Dorne's delight and honor to receive both of them, said Doran. Yet, as a dutiful uncle, or at least guardian, I feel that I must ask, what if Prince Quentyn does not return from his travels in a timely manner? Prince Doran shrugged. Lady Sansa is very young. He looked over to where Sansa lay on the chaise, and it took a great deal of effort for Sansa to focus her eyes on him. You are not yet 3 and 10, are you, my lady? Sansa shook her head. Then I see no reason for concern. It will be all the better if she has time to learn the ways of her new home before she is called to take up the duties of a wife. That is true enough. But if, gods forbid, the prince should never return, said Tyrion pointedly. Then my daughter will receive Lady Sansa into her own household and arrange an appropriate match for her at the appropriate time. One way or another, Sansa understood the prince to be saying, she will not return to King's Landing. Give her to us, and she ceases to be your problem. Sansa should be glad enough for that. Even if they did hate her in Sunspear, keep her as a hostage for her aunt Lyanna Stark, she did not think anyone in Dorne hated her the way she was hated here. Most likely, they would scarcely think on her. And Sansa doubted she would be beaten, much. Prince Doran hadn't seemed to like it when Joffrey did it. Sansa was so sunk in this thought that it took her a moment to realize that Lord Tyrion had turned to look at her, a serious, rather resigned expression on his face. What do you say to all this, Sansa, said Tyrion, his voice as gentle as she had ever heard it. Dorne is far away, I know, and it may be that some of its customs will seem strange to you. But, I believe you will be safe there. Safer, perhaps, than you have been here, since, he shrugged, his mouth twisting a little. He was asking her. Actually asking her, as though she might refuse, and the refusal means something. Sansa didn't know what she was supposed to say, what she was supposed to feel. Prince Doran spoke next. He rolled his chair closer to hers and folded his hands in his lap, looking down her with strange, soft eyes. It is unfair to ask you to consent to anything while you are in this state, and for that I apologize, he said. But once again, time makes demands of us that we cannot ignore. Sansa understood what he meant this time. There was no telling what either the Queen or Joffrey would do when they learned she had just been betrothed to Prince Doran's son. The Queen might not care so much, but Joffrey. I cannot promise that you will be happy in Dorne, Lady Sansa Doran continued, surprising her. I love my home, and I love my son better still, but you have known much grief for a maiden of your years. Your happiness must rest in your own hands. But I promise you that in Dorne, you will be honored and respected, even loved, I believe. Your own Lord Father, were he alive to see you bestowed amongst my family, would never have cause to grieve for you. I swear this to you. Sansa sifted through the courteous language, finding her thoughts slow and muddled. The poppy juice, or whatever strange fit had come over her before she took it, had made her dull and drowsy. Yet, still, she found that she believed the prince. Perhaps it was only because he made no promises without conditions. If he had sworn she would find happiness in Dorne, she could not have believed him. Instead, he had said she would be respected there. She could believe that, Prince Doran would insist on it. He even remembered that I liked lemon water, she thought, and this, for some reason, was what brought tears to her eyes. It is not for me to refuse such an offer from the Prince of Dorne, she said, hearing her Septa's words come out of her mouth. But that was why she had mimicked and practiced them since she was but a child of 3, so that she would know what to say when she had no words of her own. It seemed to Sansa that Prince Doran would have preferred some warmer answer, maybe some better thanks for the honor he had bestowed on her, but he only nodded, as if content with her acquiescence. I would have Lady Sansa depart as soon as possible, but she must have at least a day to regain her strength, said Prince Doran, turning brusquely back to Lord Tyrion. Princess Myrcilla cannot depart in such haste, said Lord Tyrion, equally brusque. No, Princess Myrcilla must make her journey in all state, said Prince Doran, agreeably. And I will wait my own return to accompany her personally. But Lady Sansa cannot have such duties as Princess Myrcilla will have to discharge before she leaves her home. Coming from the Queen, or almost anyone else, Sansa would know that the comment was meant to hurt. After all, unlike Myrcilla, Sansa had not family in King's Landing to say goodbye to. She had left her own home long ago, and no one in King's Landing would miss her when she left. But she rather suspected that Prince Doran was thinking the same thing she was. I must escape before Joffrey can stop me. Lady Sansa is a ward of the crown and the eldest daughter of Winterfell, Tyrion protested. She cannot be packed off like a thief in the night. No, said Prince Doran. Certainly she cannot. Mine own brother Prince Oberyn will take care of all the arrangements for her journey to Sunspear. I will write tonight, and he make haste to sail our ships down Blackwater Bay. Prince Oberyn. Tyrion swallowed audibly. Prince Oberyn is here. In King's Landing. No, he chose to quarter himself a short distance away. At my request. The city holds unhappy memories for my family. Prince Doran gave Tyrion a wintry smile. But he will have no difficulty arriving in time to escort the first of his two new nieces home. Sansa felt again as though she might be ill. She understood well the look on Lord Tyrion's face. Alone on a ship, with the Red Viper of Dawn. It was well known how much Prince Oberyn hated the Lannisters, hated anyone who had played a role in the death of his sister and her children. And her own father had been King Robert's best friend. She would be a hostage among the Dornish after all. He will strangle me, or throw me overboard, or... Yet even as Sansa's anxiety grew, Lord Tyrion seemed almost to relax, though there was a tartness to his next words. Yes, I am sure Lady Sansa will be as safe as any woman in the hands of Prince Oberyn. My brother is the father of 8 daughters, said Prince Doran coolly. The 5th, Elia, is of an age with Lady Sansa. I can see that you know my brother's reputation. But you have my word, there is no man who will care more for Lady Sansa's safety or honor. There is always a risk, sending a maid on a long sea voyage on a ship crewed by men, said Tyrion. Will your son accept her as his wife all the same, even if Prince Oberyn's diligence should fail to prevent some misfortune? He means if I am raped, Sansa thought, the blow falling dully against her weary heart. That is what he means when he says misfortune. Like losing one's luggage overboard in a storm. She thought of Sir Meryn, and then decided she didn't care. She would make herself not care. Or at least, no one would ever see her care. I will overlook your slight on the honor of our Dornish sailors, said Prince Doran dryly, and say only that my brother spent some time in his youth sailing aboard a pirate ship. He knows how to keep order on his own vessel. Tyrion raised both his hands in a gesture of surrender and turned his attention to his wine glass. Sansa knew, after suffering through many dinners with the royal family, that this meant Lord Tyrion was done speaking of business for the evening. The affair was settled in his eyes, the transaction had been made, and now there was nothing left for Sansa to do then, except lie there, perfectly still, waiting to see what Prince Doran would do next. Lady Sansa. Prince Doran spoke quickly, not allowing her to languish in uncertainty. I think you must be very tired. I will have my palanquin carry you back to your rooms. Oh. Sansa was struck, all at once, by the generosity of the offer, and by the spectacle she would create, traveling through the Red Keep in such a manner. My prince, you are too good, but the king will. You will allow me to deal with the king, said Prince Doran, and in all the times he had ever spoken to her, she had never heard him sound so cold before. Sansa cast her eyes down and blinked to keep the tears from her eyes. The prince's expression warmed a trifle. I hope to spend some time with you on the morrow, Lady Sansa. I do not mean to send you to Sunspear with unanswered questions. I will see to it that you are better acquainted with your new home. Thank you, my prince, said Sansa dully. I understand that it is your pleasure to walk in the gardens in the evenings. I will join you there, if you will permit. She had no choice but to nod and say that she would very pleased to meet him in the gardens tomorrow, just as she had no choice but to rise feebly from the chaise and mount the pillowed palanquin borne by 4 Dornish knights when it arrived. The prince and Lord Tyrion bid her good night as the palanquin glided through the door. It was clear that they still had matters to discuss, matters that she was not invited to take part in. She could not resent them for it, however. The prince had been right, Sansa was extremely tired. So tired that she was nearly asleep before the palanquin even reached her rooms. So just like that, I am betrothed to Prince Quentyn of Dorne, she thought vaguely, her head settling on the pillows. I do not even know how old he is. Joffrey was 3 years older than Sansa, it had seemed the perfect age to her once, just old enough for her husband to know a little more of the world than she did, but not so much older that they had nothing in common. I hope he's nothing like Joffrey, was her last thought, before sleep claimed her. I hope he's 45 and ugly and has stringy black hair and a scar on his face and a good heart. I hope he's nothing like Joffrey at all. Chapter 4. Notes. Content warnings for fairly vivid description of the canon abuses Sansa suffered, as retold by an outsider observer. Chapter text. The morning that would see Sansa Stark carried away from King's Landing aboard the Dornish vessel Nymeria's sun was dark, blustery, and ill-omened, or so the crew was saying. Oberyn paid them no mind. A bluster was not a squall, and it would take them most of a day just to sail out of Blackwater Bay. If they had to put into port somewhere, then they would put into port somewhere. What did it matter? His nephew was faffing about in Essos, trying to persuade the Targaryen girl to like the look of him. The little bride he would never marry could wait an extra day or two to reach Sunspear. Oberyn had never set eyes on Lady Sansa, but men liked to talk, particularly about pretty high-born girls they might or might not ever lay eyes on, so he had heard all the tales of her wondrous beauty, how tall and slender she was, how fair and smooth her complexion, how dainty her hands, how sweet her voice, how large and luminous her eyes of blue, how her tully hair caught the last rays of the sunset like a bonfire all ablaze. In short, Oberyn had heard everything he would expect to hear about a girl who was betrothed to a king. It wasn't as if the gossips were going to risk any rumors getting back to their future queen that they had called her nose crooked or her teeth yellow or her face more freckled than fair. Gods knew how much of it was true, but if she was, indeed, all that they said, then Oberyn was looking forward to meeting her, or at least, laying eyes on her. The rumors said nothing about her conversational skills. She could be dull as a plank, for all Oberyn knew. He was pacing up and down the beachhead when at last he spied the retinue emerging from the inner walls of the palace. If you could call it a retinue, that was. Squinting through the blue dawn light, Oberyn could make out the distinctive shape of one who could only be Lord Tyrion Lannister, and walking beside him, leaning heavily on his shoulder, was a figure hooded and cloaked. The figure was unmistakably female in its contours, but the cloak was voluminous, a man's cloak, Oberyn rather thought, and the hood hung so far down that he could not see the girl's face. Apart from these two, Oberyn saw only 4 other men, and none of them wore Baratheon colors. They were 4 of Doran's own knights, including Daemon Sand, who carried a chest of middling size in his arms. An uneasy feeling began to curl in Oberyn's chest, but he stepped forward to greet the party anyway. "It is my wish that you take great care with the Lady Sansa," Doran had written, in the letter Oberyn had received only 12 hours ago, the same letter that had fetched him and his ship to this isolated dock. "She has been a prisoner in the Red Keep for a long while, and she has suffered in her captivity. She will not trust you easily, but she has a gentle heart and she is not unintelligent. Draw her out, but do not overwhelm her." Oberyn hoped it would never be said that he was the sort of man who set out to frighten maidens for his own amusement. He especially hoped that his own brother knew him better than that. So he interpreted Doran's instructions as meaning that the girl was nervous about her journey, about marrying a stranger, and, perhaps, nervous about whatever it was that had made Doran decide to take her into his protection and rush her out of King's Landing, as though she were a maid from a tale being liberated from a high tower by a gallant knight. Oberyn was far more interested in how Doran had come to that decision than he was in the girl herself. Doran was not inclined to act on impulse. He made his plans and he followed through on them, his course as undeviating as the flight of an arrow. He might strike suddenly to grasp an advantage that made itself known, but as far as Oberyn could tell, there was little advantage that Dorne would gain from breaking this child's betrothal to the king and matching her with Quentyn instead. After all, what on earth were they do with her when Quentyn sent word from Essos that he was married already? Those were questions for another time, however. For so long as Sansa Stark was his particular charge, Oberyn would do as his brother asked, and be courteous to this browbeaten maid. When he was younger, he might have found the task distasteful. She was a Stark, after all, niece to the Lady Lyanna herself, but this Lady Sansa was still a maiden not yet flowered, and Oberyn was not cruel enough to punish her for offences committed before she was born. Lord Tyrion, Oberyn called brightly. Greetings to you this fine morning. He tested the air and decided it probably wasn't raining, only very foggy. I understand you bring me mine own niece to be. Lord Tyrion gave him a strange look. Yes, Prince Oberyn. The king was unavoidably called away this morning, but he wishes me to convey to you his pleasure and satisfaction that his ward is to be made part of your family and he is honorably assured that you will do all that is needed to protect her in his place. Prince Doran likewise bade me send you his greetings. He hopes that his letter reached you in good time. I am here, said Oberyn simply. So it must have, must it not? Will you be so good as to introduce me to this fair lady? Lord Tyrion's mouth gave a funny little sideways jerk. He stepped aside, causing the lady to stumble a little when she no longer had the support of his shoulder. Oberyn found himself wondering, amusedly, if the Lady Sansa had drunk a little too deeply to celebrate her betrothal last night. Her feet certainly appeared none too steady. Prince Oberyn, said Lord Tyrion. Permit me to present to you, Lady Sansa, of House Stark. Lady Sansa, this is Prince Oberyn Martell, the younger brother of Prince Doran, whom you have met. Prince Doran has charged him with seeing you safely to your new home in Dorne. The hooded figure, indistinguishable from the cloth that draped it, lifted a hand to her throat, as though she had started to say something, only to find her throat dry. Instead, she dropped a low, impeccable, graceful curtsy. The formality took Oberyn off guard, but he could only respond with a similarly deep bow. Ah, Lord Tyrion looked up at Sansa, something tight and worried around his eyes. Lady Sansa, unfortunately, took a chill late last night whilst praying in the Godswood. She finds this morning that any speech pains her throat. It is nothing contagious, of course. No need for your crew to worry. She'll be quite well in a few days. I see. I am most sorry to hear that you are feeling ill, Lady Sansa. The little Lannister was lying to him, but there wasn't much that Oberyn could do about that unless he wanted to force a confrontation, and he would rather be away as soon as possible. Then let us waste no time in seeing you safely bestowed in your chambers, where you may rest. A thought struck him, he frowned. Where is my lady's luggage? Here, my prince. Demon Sand stepped forward, bearing the wooden chest. It was decorated in a beautiful, unsettling carved pattern of runes and trees, which marked it indelibly as a handicraft of the north. It was so small and light that Demon might easily have tucked it under one arm. It might hold 2 gowns at most, or a dozen books perhaps. Oberyn glanced around, but there were no more chests, no trunks, not even a sack. She is a Stark of Winterfell, Oberyn thought, slightly offended on the girl's behalf, but mostly confused. What have they done with her clothing? Her jewels? There was an accident, said Lord Tyrion, as though reading Oberyn's mind. He still spoke in the uncomfortable tones of a man who, though everyone hearing him knew he was lying, must yet continue to lie anyway. There was a fire in Lady Sansa's rooms recently. The smoke, unfortunately, ruined most of her wardrobe, and the rest of her things perished in the flames. My lady, said Oberyn, hiding his deeper unease behind a concern that was not entirely feigned. This has indeed been a season of misfortunes for you. We shall see what we can do about reversing those fortunes when you reach Sunspear. He waited, but of course she did not reply, only curtsied again. Whatever sort of conversationalist she would make when her throat was healed, Oberyn had to admit that her manners were beautiful. Are we not yet awaiting other members of the party, said Oberyn, after looking around into the silence and fog for a moment. The Lady Sansa must have companions and mates who travel with her. There was a long silence. Lord Tyrion stared uncomfortably at the ground. Eventually, Sansa shook her head slowly. What, am I to believe that all of her friends and handmaidens perished in this so-called fire as well? Oberyn thought incredulously. He wanted to argue, but he wanted to be gone more. Lady Sansa would just have to empty her own chamber pot for a few days, until Oberyn could figure out some more suitable arrangement. In that case, my lady, he said, I am sure that Lord Tyrion will want to wish you Godspeed, that we might be on our way. Oberyn expected her leave-taking of Lord Tyrion to be as perfunctory as the preparations for her departure had been. Clearly the imp had no great regard for her honor, he couldn't see why the girl would care any more for him than he for her. But to Oberyn's surprise, Lady Sansa turned immediately to Lord Tyrion and gave him her hand. Tyrion kissed it, then surprised Oberyn still more by holding on to it and giving it a tight squeeze. "I will not charge you to be brave," said the dwarf, in low tones that Oberyn had to strain to hear. "I know well enough that you possess the courage of 10 knights. All I will say is, that I believe you have made a wise decision." The imp's face twisted. "And, Lady Sansa, I am sorry. I should have done far more to protect you. Forgive me." Protect her from what? Oberyn wondered. Lady Sansa had suffered, no doubt, but how was the dwarf to have protected her from the sorrow of seeing her father's head struck off? Oberyn received a second shock when the girl bent low. Tall as she was, she almost had to bend double, and dropped a chaste kiss to Lord Tyrion's cheek. Then, without a backwards glance, she turned and made her way down the pier. Oberyn quickly darted into place beside her, holding his arm out, and Doran's men followed automatically behind him. "If you would humor me, Lady Sansa," he said. "It is dark, and though the water is not deep here, best you not risk a drenching when you are already chilled." Sansa stopped, froze, rather, as though the prospect of taking his arm filled her with terror. Curiously, Daemon stopped as well, casting an uncertain glance at Oberyn over his shoulder. Then Sansa took a deep breath, and placed her hand on Oberyn's arm, as lightly as she could. Oberyn felt as though a butterfly had come to rest on his sleeve. Such a delicate grip would not stop her from going over into the water, but Oberyn's reflexes were quick enough if it came to that. Still, most women were not so hesitant to avail themselves of his strength. Oberyn found himself wondering uneasily if his hasty bath this morning had been insufficient. "Prince Oberyn," called Tyrion from the shore. Oberyn placed his hand over Lady Sansa's arm automatically and waited for her to step off the pier and onto the deck of the ship. Then he turned to look back at the dwarf. "If you were to dock briefly at Sandy Wedge, I believe you might find that tidings await you there." "Tidings?" Oberyn frowned. "Yes. New tidings." Tyrion frowned. "From the prince your brother." Sandy Wedge was but 3 hours sailing from this dock. What on earth could his brother have to say to him in 3 hours that he could not say to him now? But Lord Tyrion did not wait to answer more questions. He bowed stiffly, and waddled off into the distance. Oberyn hopped down onto the deck and watched him go until he was a dim, invisible shape in the fog. Then the moorings were untethered, they were underway. Oberyn found Sansa standing stock still, her eyes trained on the deck of the ship. She did not look ahead of her, nor to the sides, where the water was already lapping the sides of the ship. It was then that Oberyn realized that she was terrified, and his heart wrung with pity for her. "I shall show you to your cabin," he said gently. "I am sure you would like to rest. Daemon has already stowed your things there." She nodded, once. Oberyn found himself wishing that she would remove her hood. Trying to play host to a girl with no face was rather like trying to charm a scepter, or a ghost. But a stiff, chill breeze swept over the deck then, and she only pulled the cloak about her more tightly, so Oberyn led her towards her cabin and bowed her inside. The cabin was Oberyn's. The only alternative, when he learned they had a girl to transport, was to boot the captain out of his own cabin, something Oberyn would not do on another man's ship. It was spare, as fit Oberyn's own tastes when on a sea voyage. Sansa took in the single bunk, the chest, and the washstand on its table with half a glance. He half expected her to shake her head or give him a dismayed look, but she only stood there, eyes trained on the small round window. In truth, Oberyn was half ashamed that he could provide no better accommodation for a high-born lady, much less a Martell bride-to-be, and not for the first time he wondered why Lady Sansa was traveling so far ahead of the Princess Myrcella. The ship that would carry Myrcella to Sunspear was far more comfortably furnished than this one. Also, the princess undoubtedly had her own scepter and maids, which would relieve Sansa of the discomfort of being the only woman aboard the ship. "I am sorry that there is nothing more suitable to offer you," he said. In truth, Nymeria's son was never intended to provide passage to ladies. "I see nothing lacking, my prince." The pained, rasping whisper startled Oberyn so much that his hands jerked. Sansa touched her throat, as though even these few words had hurt her. Please do not trouble yourself about me. I will make it known if I require aught. Oberyn was suddenly uneasy about leaving her alone, surely she needed water for that throat of hers, at least. But she had dismissed him, and he could hardly stay in a maiden's cabin against her will. My lady, he said, and bowed again, shutting the door. A second later, Oberyn heard a curious noise, as though Sansa were struggling to lower the bolt on the inside of the door. She probably would not manage it. The wood grew swollen in the damp, and even Oberyn found it a challenge to dislodge it some days. But it troubled him that she had thought to try. Was she truly so frightened of his men? Should he knock again and offer to post a guard at her door? No, that was not likely to be a comfort, not if it was his men who gave her so much unease. Oberyn shook his head and went to see the captain, to give him his new orders, Sandy Wedge first, then the tip of Stone Dance. That obligation discharged, he went for a stroll on the deck, breathing in the salt air and allowing the wind to ruffle his hair. He found Daemon, seated on an overturned crate, sharpening his spear. Oberyn pulled up a seat beside him and sat there, silently, waiting. He knew the younger man well enough to know that something was on his mind, that had been obvious since the pier. Furthermore, Oberyn knew Daemon well enough to know that he was bursting to come out with it. They promised me a beautiful maiden, and instead delivered me a silent sister, said Oberyn, sighing in mock disappointment. I feel quite cheated. I thought I heard her speak to you, said Daemon, not looking up at him. Only to thank me, and then to turn me unceremoniously from her cabin. Oberyn leaned back against the mast and propped his boots up on the railing. Daemon only grunted, and adjusted the angle of the whetstone. Far be it from me to question my brother's will, but this seems a most mysterious errand he has charged me with, Oberyn continued. I am sure that when my brother set out for King's Landing, he meant to return with but one bride for one of my nephews, not one for each. And why does the Lady Sansa travel so far ahead of the Princess Myrcella? Surely it would have been wiser to send both girls together. This one doesn't even have a maid of her own. She never had a maid, said Daemon, readjusting his whetstone. Only the Queen's spies, surrounding her. They had no love of her, nor her for them. Oberyn turned his head slowly and peered at Daemon. You know the Lady Sansa well? Not well, my prince. Daemon shrugged. My brother's letter was uninformative, even by his standards, Oberyn prodded, nudging Daemon's shoulder. Perhaps Prince Doran felt that Lady Sansa had a right to share her secrets in her own time. Oberyn arched an eyebrow. Daemon was not normally so short with him. He had been Oberyn's own squire as a boy, and it had been Oberyn himself who knighted him. After Daemon was of suitable age, they had even been lovers from time to time, when the mood suited them. Daemon was, accordingly, permitted certain liberties of speech that Oberyn did not normally tolerate from knights in his brother's service. But this was different. Daemon was troubled, and not by anything Oberyn had done. They had travelled separately to King's Landing. There had not been time enough for Oberyn to irritate the younger man since their reunion. What could have happened over a mere 2 days in the capital to disgruntle Daemon so? There was nothing Oberyn could think of, unless, could Daemon have fallen in love with the Lady Sansa? That might account for much preciousness. Oberyn hid his smile behind his mouth. They say that Lady Sansa is most beautiful. Was I lied to? She is as fair a maiden as ever I have seen, said Daemon shortly, not looking up. But Oberyn waited. Daemon sighed heavily. Forgive me, my prince. I find it difficult to speak lightly of her. Not after these past 2 days in the capital. All the levity fled Oberyn's body in a single breath, leaving a leaden heaviness in his chest. Tell me of them, he said, his soft tone making it no less an order. Daemon cast the whetstone to one side irritably. He took up a rag and began rubbing oil into the metal haft of his spear. I know only what I saw, and that was but the smallest part. If you do not tell me now, you will certainly tell me later. Oberyn smiled grimly. It is a long voyage. I will soon grow impatient for new tales to while away the hours. This is no tale for anyone's amusement. Daemon flung the rag away, as if disgusted. Then he turned to Oberyn, fixing him with intent blue eyes. You wished to know why it was that your brother the prince carried away 2 brides, when he only came for one. That I can answer simply enough. He did it to save the lady's life. The king nearly killed her before our very eyes. Oberyn stared. He did not disbelieve Demon, but the statement made no sense. Her father had lost his head, yes, and her brother was currently styling himself king in the north, but what had that to do with Sansa? Was she suspected of some treason? Surely the king would not have given her to Doran if he thought her guilty of such. No, no treason. I did not speak of execution. I say she was nearly murdered. His spear sharpened and honed, Demon turned back to the whetstone, this time taking up his short sword. I stood at the prince's right hand when his litter approached the doors of the throne room. I tried to give our names to the seneschal, but he did not so much as look our way at first. Everyone was staring at the Iron Throne, where the king stood holding a crossbow on the Lady Sansa. It was loaded, primed, and his very eyes were fixed on her heart. And all the while, she only knelt before him, weeping and obeisant. Oberyn stared at him. My brother saw this, you say? He did. Demon released a ragged sigh. Prince Doran commanded us to be silent. We none of us dared to startle the king, lest he lose the quarrel by accident. But then the king put the crossbow aside. Demon sucked air between his teeth and set back to sharpening his sword with a new energy. He ordered his king's guard to beat her. And he was obeyed. One drove his fist into the lady's stomach. She collapsed, scarce able to breathe, and in the next moment the king ordered that she be stripped naked. Where was Barristan Selmy? Oberyn would not believe that Sir Barristan would permit any knight in his charge to beat a helpless maid, whatever the king commanded. He was a true man, no mere king could command him to discard his honor. Sir Barristan was not present, Demon muttered. I heard later that he had been stripped of his cloak and dismissed from his position shortly after King Robert's death. Oberyn stared blankly at Demon. The king's guard served for life, they died in their office. It had always been thus. The new Lord Commander is none other than the Kingslayer. Demon smiled wryly. But he is Robb Stark's prisoner now, they say. It might have been better for Stark's sister if he were not. Say what you will of Jaime Lannister, I do not think that even he would have. Demon looked out over the water, and Oberyn knew that he did not want to say whatever he was going to say next. Subtly, Oberyn nudged closer to him, pressing the warmth of his arm against Demon's arm. Once the lady had been stripped of her gown, the king ordered her beaten, said Demon, in a tight voice. She took 3 blows from the flat of a longsword against her naked flesh. Oberyn's pulse was pounding in his temples. My brother did not see that and stand idly by. When the knight raised his sword the first time, your brother the prince demanded that the seneschal announce him. He thought that his arrival would halt the beating. But it did not. The knight had some taste for his work, it would seem. He scarce paused between blows. Demon had left both sword and stone fall slack in his hands, and he gazed down miserably at the deck. Once the king caught sight of your brother, he forgot about the lady soon enough, but even then he made no provision for Lady Sansa. Even her maids would not help her. She tried to rise when Prince Doran's litter approached, but she could not. But I felt the prince's hand touch my shoulder, so I went to her. I helped her from the throne room. A dozen steps, and she collapsed, so I carried her to her chambers, to her own bed. Her maids said, Demon choked. They said that the king did not permit her the attentions of a maester. This was not the first such incident, Oberyn said, completing the thought for him. Demon seemed close to tears, for rage, or sorrow, or both, he could not tell. Oberyn gripped the younger man's shoulder tightly, and Demon leaned into the grip. Demon took a ragged breath. I returned to Prince Doran and informed him. He sent Maester Miles to attend her. Oberyn watched as Demon began rubbing oil into his sword. For a copper, I would have opened this knight's throat at the very foot of the Iron Throne. Kingsguard, he calls himself. He snorted. Your great-uncle Prince Luwin would have shoved a foot of steel up his ass. Which was the knight, said Oberyn, his own voice calmer than it had any right to be. Sir Meryn, they called him. I never learned the name of his house. Doran will know it by now. Men underestimated his brother, because Doran was the picture of prudence and control. They never guessed the deep vein of passion that ran to the core of his being. His patience made him seem safe, when a wise man would see that it only made him the more dangerous. Why did he not send a maester? Her wounds will need tending. Gods be good, I thought her merely frightened of me, Oberyn realized, remembering how rigid the girl had been, holding on to his arm. She must be suffering agonies. A chill in the throat. She has worn her voice hoarse for weeping, rather. Lord Tyrion roused me early and said that we must depart in the greatest possible haste, said Daemon. I cannot say for certain, but I believe something else must have happened this morning. Something to make Lord Tyrion believe Lady Sansa was in immediate peril. No one would say aught, and Maester Miles would not let me wake Prince Doran, but Lord Tyrion was tearing about in a fury. I nearly pushed the Maester aside, but Lord Tyrion looked so serious, and the prince had charged me especially with Lady Sansa's safety. It occurred to me that King might have, I was afraid to wait for further orders. Daemon sat there, stone-faced, and it was clear to Oberyn that Daemon was waiting for him to say he had done wrong. Instead, Oberyn sighed, and rested his hand on the back of Daemon's neck, fingers sifting through the short curls above his collar. Stranger take them all, said Oberyn, quiet and bitter in his frustration. My brother wrote yesterday that the Lady Sansa would be slow to trust me. He neglected to mention that she is bound to be terrified of every man who wields a sword. Perhaps, said Daemon quietly. Perhaps not. She is not without reason. I saw her twice, and she was courteous and accommodating when I relayed the prince's invitation to her. Oberyn was distracted, thinking through the supplies he carried on board the ship. He always traveled well stocked with potions and other necessaries for wound care and minor illnesses. He never traveled with a maester, since he had forged his silver link at the citadel. His ministrations would suffice until they reached Sandy Wedge, but then... Ah, said Oberyn, letting his head fall back against the mast with a thunk. Lord Tyrion said there would be further tidings for me from Doran at Sandy Wedge. I suppose those tidings will include a maester. Hopefully a maid as well, said Daemon, following his line of thought. I must go and see her, said Oberyn, getting to his feet with a sudden energy. If I cannot give her all she requires, I can at least give her something for the pain. You must accompany me. My prince. Daemon looked stunned. I have scarcely exchanged a dozen words with the lady. Yet we have no duenna, so you will have to suffice. And as you say, the lady was courteous to you. Oberyn grinned. Judging from all you have described, I would not be surprised if she was half in love with you. And why should she not be? Oberyn thought. Daemon was probably the first man who had touched her with a gentle hand since her lord father was struck down. Daemon stood slowly, an irritable expression on his face. You did not see her, my prince, he said. She was not thinking of me, or of anyone. When I carried her from the throne room, she had breath only to pray for the mother's mercy and the warrior's protection. Oberyn found that this pierced him to the quick, somehow. It was dreadful to think of a maiden calling on the warrior's protection when he, the warrior's most faithful son, was not there to provide it. Well. I am here now. Oberyn turned to Daemon and told him to go below and unearth his casket of medicines. Then he went to Sansa's cabin. Chapter 5. Notes. Content warning for graphic medical content, description and treatment of burn injuries. Chapter text. Lady Sansa. Oberyn did not knock, he feared the noise would frighten her. It is I, Oberyn. Sir Daemon is with me. May we enter? Oberyn waited what seemed an interminable time. He heard, through the thin cabin walls, the sounds of Lady Sansa rising from her bed, the blanket being moved aside, a creaking of the bunk's hinges. He also heard, or thought he heard, a muffled cry of pain. Oberyn bit down on the inside of his mouth and waited. The lady could not speak to bid him enter. He would have to proceed cautiously. Oberyn turned the latch and allowed the door to swing inward slowly before ever putting a foot over the threshold. Then, once he was sure he had given her enough warning, he proceeded the rest of the way inside. Daemon had rejoined him by now, and Oberyn's cask of supplies filled both his hands. The casket was small, but it had to be carried upright and level, and Daemon bore it before him as though carrying it on a platter. Oberyn himself carried a cup and a large carafe of water. If Lady Sansa's throat was as sore as it sounded, she would need to drink as much as she could bear. He nearly dropped both carafe and cup when his eyes adjusted to the dim interior light, and he saw the sight before him. Lady Sangza was attempting to pull the oversized grey cloak back over her shoulders, but she was in too much pain to move quickly. Only half of her body was covered by the cloak. The other half. "Oh, my lady," said Demon, sounding crushed. The reason for the huge cloak was now obvious. Lady Sangza wore nothing underneath it, save for a sleeping shift. The shift it was covered with holes, most of them singed black around the edges. The cap of her left shoulder, the back of her left arm, and part of her shoulder blade were all bare. But instead of revealing smooth white skin, the singed holes in her gown revealed large patches of angry burns, blistered and broken and almost impossible to look upon. And there was more. The shift was torn down the back, as though someone had frantically tried to wrest it off Sangza's body. It was probably a well-intentioned gesture. It would have been better to smother the burning clothing with a heavy blanket, but people panicked, and tearing the burning garment off of her was a natural impulse. Because the shift was so torn, Oberyn and Demon both could see clearly that, where the skin of her back was not burned, it was covered with dozens of welts. Some were mere scars, already silver-white with age, most were newer and redder. Others were clearly fresh, bleeding through day-old bandages. When Sangza inhaled shakily, Oberyn realized all at once that he had been standing and staring at her for much too long. Gods knew what she must think of him, what she must be fearing. He instantly circled round to where she could see him, careful to keep his hands spread, his posture non-threatening. "Forgive us, my lady," said Oberyn. His voice was hoarse. "I did not mean to barge in upon you thus." Sangza had ceased her attempts to wrestle the cloak back over her shoulder when Demon cried out with the shock of seeing her. Now, she sat on the bed, hunched forward, her arms crossed over her breasts. She scarcely seemed to move a muscle, even to breathe. It was Demon who broke the spell that had settled over the cabin. He placed Oberyn's medicine casket down on the end of the bunk, then took the water from Oberyn's unresisting fingers. Slowly, he approached and knelt to face her. Oberyn watched as Demon placed the cup upon the table and filled it from the water carafe. Then he gave the cup to Lady Sangza and closed her trembling fingers around it. "You should drink, my lady," he said soberly. As though she were simply in the habit of obeying orders, no matter who gave them, Lady Sangza raised the cup to her lips. But after one sip, she began gulping the water down, and soon Demon was refilling the cup for her. "My lady," Oberyn knew that Sangza was uncomfortable beneath his scrutiny, but he felt entirely helpless and unable to tear his eyes away from her. Before he quite knew what he was doing, he had removed his amber silk surcoat, embroidered with the sun and spears of House Martell. He held it out, like a veil or a curtain, and offered it to her. She hesitated, then looked up to meet his eyes for the first time. Her eyes were, indeed, just as large and luminous and blue as the gossips said. Her skin was just as fair, and her hair was just as glorious, and it angered him beyond all reason to see that a lock or two had been singed short. "Thank you, my prince," she said, her whisper just a touch less hoarse now. She clutched his coat in his colors to her chest, and it seemed to him that she sat just a bit straighter for it. "I had not the slightest idea that you were so grievously injured," Lady Sangza, Oberyn said, trying to pitch his voice as evenly and calmly as possible. He dared not allow the slightest part of his anger to escape the cloak of his control, or all of it might come out, and the resulting rage was bound to terrify her. "In a few hours, we are due to make port where we will receive messengers from my brother. I suspect he has already anticipated our needs, but if not, we will find a maester who is willing to travel with us to Sunspear." "My prince," Sangza whispered, "the king, if we are seen." Oberyn filled her water cup again. Now he understood this mysterious throat ailment. It came of the smoke and heat from the flames. She needed iced honey milk and as much cold water as they could keep on ice below. "The king will not trouble us," Oberyn told her. "You have my word on that." "But he will," Sangza cried, then seized her throat with one hand and breathed raggedly, features tight with pain. Oberyn jerked forward, nearly grasping her by the shoulders, remembering at the last second that this would only hurt her more. Sangza gulped water, then clutched the cup to her chest. "I warned Sir Demon. I tried to warn the prince. No one believed me." Demon's eyes tightened, and he looked down. Oberyn looked at her back again, and suddenly, sickeningly, he understood. Lady Sansa, Oberyn said heavily. I would believe this king capable of any monstrousness, I assure you. I only meant that we will not be seen. I will make certain of it. He wanted, badly, to ask her how the fire had started, but Oberyn knew. Doran's message would confirm it, he had no doubt, but Oberyn had seen too much of the world, too much of men, not to guess the truth. Lady Sansa said demon. He was still kneeling at her feet, looking as mild as a golden pup with long ears. My prince has a master's skill in the arts of healing and medicines. He studied at the citadel itself in his youth. If you would permit, Prince Oberyn should see to your wounds now. That is, the prince deeply regrets that there are no other ladies on board to attend you, but I give you my word that Prince Oberyn is a man of the greatest honor. Oberyn stood very still, afraid that any movement or gesture on his part might seem threatening. Sansa took another drink of water. Then she gave a very small, very polite smile. Prince Doran said the same of you, my prince. Some of the tension began to ebb from Oberyn's shoulders, but not all of it. Sir Demon will remain, with your permission, he said, rolling the sleeves of his linen undershirt to his elbows and turning to the basin to wash his hands. I shall have need of his assistance. He did not look to see her nod, but Demon was still there when he turned around again, so he took that as a sign that she approved. I will be seated on the bed just behind you, my lady, Oberyn said, moving as he spoke, trying to convey the same air of neutral efficiency he had observed in the maesters who had attended his brother over the years. I shall have to cut away portions of the shift, but I promise to preserve your modesty. If I hurt you, you must tell me. Demon came to stand next to him at the far end of the bed, holding the casket open for him as Oberyn got to work. Oberyn's dagger was well oiled, so it made no noise when he drew it from the sheath, but he felt, rather than heard, the catch of Sansa's breath as he began cutting through the tatters that clung to her shoulders. Gently, trying to convey apology with his every movement, he brushed aside the half of the heavy cloak that was still covering her on the right side. He made a few more cuts, and the entire back of the shift fell open like a flap. The next few minutes were tense, the silence broken by nothing by Oberyn's terse commands for Demon to hand him linen wraps, large bottles, tiny vials. He tried to keep his thoughts from darkening as he worked, tried to focus on nothing but the task before him. Burns were a bad business. Improperly treated, they could be as fatal as a foot of steel through the gut. Broken skin was also dangerous, but could at least be treated with Moorish fire and other remedies. Broken skin which had been burned, however, one could not pour fire on fire. Not without producing agony. Oberyn had met a woman once, years ago. She had claimed to be from west of Westeros, the only person Oberyn had ever known in all his travels who had ever made that claim. Where she came from, she said, there were neither kings nor princes nor lords, only the rule of law, the same law for all men and all women, however high or low their birth. In this strange and probably non-existent land she claimed as her home, she held the title of a doctor of the University of the Southern Mountains. It was a place not unlike the Citadel, judging from her talk, but the learning she had acquired there contradicted much that Oberyn himself had learned, particularly when it came to healing. Oberyn had argued long hours with her over theories regarding the sources of disease and illness. After a few days, he decided that all her wild stories were just a way of keeping him out of her bed. She had taken more convincing than any woman he had ever met before she would let him touch her. But then one night, in an isolated mountain pass, they had fallen a four of sellswords, and she had taken a serious wound to her leg. Blood fever set in a few days later. Oberyn knew she could not live long. He had wanted to bleed her, but she had looked at him with glassy eyes and called him an idiot. She'd said that if she ever caught him bleeding her, or anyone else, she would cut his throat, for both their sakes. Then she demanded the use of his dagger. She'd heated it in the fire until it glowed as red as the flames, and cauterized the wound in her leg with her own hands. Now it is only a burn, she'd told him afterwards. The heat has drawn the infection out from beneath the skin, and this will cause the flesh to knit into a scar. That was when she had shown him the use of green sap. In Dawn, it was used in small quantities to soothe mild sunburn, but she had squeezed thick layers of it over the burn, covered the whole area with honey, and wrapped it loosely in thin gauze. To treat the blood fever, she had drunk nothing but a tea made of yarrow, ginger, and garlic for 3 days. By the 4th day, the fever had broken. By the 5th, she could walk with the aid of a stick. Oberyn judged that none of the welts on Sansa's back were deep enough to warrant Moorish fire, or gods forbid, boiling wine, but he called up the memory of his old traveling companion as he smeared thick layers of green sap and honey over all the places where Sansa was burned. Her burns, at least, were not so severe as the other had been. Had they been treated immediately, the blisters would not have broken, and they might even have healed without scarring. That would not be the case now, however. He removed the old bandages that Doran's maester had applied to the welts on her back and covered them with peppermint oil and more bandages. Finally, he placed thin strips of gauze in overlapping layers over nearly the whole of her back, and wound longer strips loosely around her upper arm. When he was finally finished, he let out a long, deep breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The whole time he had been working, Sansa had made not a single sound, save for one or two tiny cries muffled so deep in her throat that Oberyn would not have heard them if he had not been listening for them. She was the quietest, the gentlest patient he had ever tended, but he knew it was strength, not submission, that kept her quiet. "I know you have the strength of 10 knights," Lord Tyrion had said to her before they parted. Oberyn thought of Bretomartis, his mysterious traveling companion, who had claimed no titles but had crowned her head in golden braids. He remembered how her face had not changed expression when she pressed the red-hot knife to the wound on her leg. Oberyn felt as though he could weep, but if Sansa would not, he would not. "Here," said Oberyn. It was the first word that any of them had spoken for almost 20 minutes. He tugged at the old grey cloak Sansa had been wearing until it came free. The long hem had been trapped between the bed and the wall, which was why Sansa had been unable to pull it over her in time. And thank the gods for that, or she never would have said a word to us of any of this, Oberyn thought, his anger an unfocused, formless thing. Oberyn examined the cloak to be certain that it was fairly clean. No doubt it had been wrested off the shoulders of some passerby at random, by Lord Tyrion probably. Then he draped it lightly over Sansa's bandaged back. "You must lie on your front or your right side," he told her gently. "You should not lie on your back until you are healed. Nor should you wear restrictive clothing." He would not embarrass her by mentioning corsets to her now. It wasn't as though she had any, after all. "Mind you don't pull the cloak too tightly around you, or the bandages will not stay in place. Keep it over your shoulders, though. The body often takes a chill when it has been burned. You may shiver, as with a fever." "I will do all that you say," Sansa whispered. "Thank you, my prince. You have been most kind." Oberyn's mouth twisted. She thinks this a kindness. But after all that demon had seen and said. Yes, of course, she thought it a kindness. No doubt she had been made to think that for her to receive care of any sort was a very great kindness indeed. "You should rest now," he said, gesturing to Demon to pack the bottles back into his casket. "I will bring you more water by and by. It will be some 2 hours before we make harbor. I shall not wake you until necessary." Sansa nodded. Oberyn could see only the bright crown of her red hair, moving up and down. There was a rustle of cloth, and then she wordlessly offered his coat back to him. "Keep it," he said roughly. "It is softer to lie on than the bedding on this bunk." Sansa released a long, low breath, and Oberyn gestured to Demon to begin clearing away the detritus of his work, the snips of bandages, the empty vials. He had poured a thimble cup of milk of the poppy into her water before he began work, so he was certain, at least, that she would sleep soon. "Prince Oberyn," she said, as he stood from the bed, ready to leave. "My lady." "I have not seen," she whispered. "But I know, I can tell." Oberyn waited, unsure what she was asking. "Prince Doran never meant to give his son a disfigured bride," she said at last. Oberyn took a few steps forward and knelt near the head of the bed, so that he could look upon her. Her lips were blue and her skin was ashen, but he could not say whether it was the poppy, the chill, or only the effects of long sorrow. "I would understand," she said. "If he chose, if he no longer." Understanding dawned in a flash. "No," said Oberyn abruptly, getting to feet again. The look she gave him was one of injured frustration, as though she thought it unkind of him to cut her off when every word cost her so much effort to speak. Oberyn forced himself to stop grinding his teeth and explain. "My brother would never abandon you for this," he said, purposefully avoiding mention of Quentyn. "Nor for any reason, I think." Sansa's head jerked up. Was that suspicion he saw in her face, or something subtler? Oberyn gazed at her wide blue eyes and high cheekbones, her tumbled mane of slightly singed copper-red hair. Disfigured, he thought disbelievingly. In Dorne, she would learn, one way or another, that scars were neither shameful, nor distasteful to look upon. "You must rest now," he said again. Daemon had already slipped quietly out of the room and returned with another carafe of water, this one cold, dripping with condensation. He placed it on the table next to Sansa's bunk. "Sir Daemon will stand guard outside your door. If you need aught, only speak out, and he will hear you." Oberyn did not stay to hear her thank him again. He turned on his heel and strode out of the cabin, pausing only to be certain that the door would not slam shut behind him. Then he stalked across the deck to the railing and gripped it tight, hanging his head over the edge. The smell of the sea, the buffeting of the wind, this, he needed. And if he vomited, as he might well do, better to do it into the water. Daemon came to join him a moment later. He was still, technically, just outside Sansa's door, so Oberyn did not berate him for abandoning his post. "You knew nothing of this?" Oberyn said, without turning around to look upon the younger man. "Of course not, my prince. We none of us knew. Nor Prince Doran either, I don't think." Daemon's tone was pitiful. "I don't understand it. I have sometimes heard of ladies who catch their hair alight in the flames of candles, but her hair is not much burnt. And why was she not attended to? Why was she not dressed? Lord Tyrion is not like the king. I thought him fond of the Lady Sansa." Visions of Mad King Aerys roasting Rickard Stark alive in his own armor danced behind Oberyn's eyes. He laughed roughly. "Whether he likes it or not, my Lord Hand's duty is to get the king married, eventually. That task will not be made easier if word gets out that his grace tried to burn his last bride to be in her own bed." Oberyn heard Daemon take 2 or 3 deep breaths, as though he too were struggling with sudden sickness. "You cannot mean," he said slowly, but then he fell silent. Daemon was kindly, and cheerful, but not stupid. They both stood there at the railing for a long moment, listening to the work of the sailors around them. Oberyn watched the waves break against the sides of the ship and tried hard to think of absolutely nothing else. "Prince Doran is having someone meet us at the harbor," Daemon said forcefully, when his breathing was again even. "You can send word back to him." "He can, he will. Doran will already know by now. Lord Tyrion will have told him." Oberyn sighed heavily and straightened. "Just as well for us. I would as soon send the lady on to Sunspear and return to the Red Keep myself." "My prince," Daemon sounded torn. "I would go with you, and gladly. But I do not think the Lady Sansa would thank us. No. She is too wise for that. A maiden not yet flowered, and she saw all the while what none of us would open our eyes to." Oberyn shook his head. "But it is no matter. We need do nothing, so long as Doran knows. He will hold his tongue, and make his list, and sooner or later he will have their heads. One and all." Oberyn could feel the skeptical look that Daemon trained on his back, but he ignored it. Better if Daemon continued to think his brother mild and gentle. Better for everyone, especially those who had incurred his vengeance. Chapter 6. Chapter text. Doran sat in his rolling chair and looked out the wide windows onto a vast bay full of blue water, thinking about Sansa Stark. In his lap, there sat balanced a small writing desk, complete with parchment, ink, quills, and blotting paper. Doran had been trying, and failing, to write a letter to Sansa for the last 10 minutes. There were 3 sheets of crumpled parchment at his feet, they would have to be burned soon. The parchment currently beneath his hand bore Sansa's name written at the top. He hadn't yet managed to write anything else. He had already written 1 letter, to Oberyn, and it was already rolled into a scroll and sealed in red wax impressed with his signet. That letter had taken only a minute to write, but then, it contained nothing but a list of instructions. "I send gold. Lease a new ship with accommodations suitable for Lady Sansa's long recovery. If she worsens early in the voyage, take her to Pentos. If you are pursued by the king's ships across the narrow sea, make for Teosh. Otherwise, press on for as long as Lady Sansa's strength endures. The Tolans will host you if you make it so far as Dorne. Do not surrender the lady to her former friends under any circumstances. It was a weighty letter for all its brevity. He knew how his brother thought. Under any circumstances, Doran had given Oberyn tacit permission to burn the king's ships if that was what it took to keep Lady Sansa safe. Such an act could lead to war. Doran told himself that he was not, seriously, considering starting a war just to save a child he had known for 2 days, and that he was merely confident in his brother's ability to outsail every ship in the Royal Navy. It was not strictly necessary for Doran to write to Sansa at all. A postscript addressed to her at the end of the first letter would have sufficed. But under the circumstances, a mere postscript seemed inadequate. He must say something to the girl. She must be reassured, encouraged, apologized to. Doran was not certain why, each time he tried to convey these sentiments, his words deserted him. It was folly he had time for. He picked up his quill for the 4th time in 10 minutes, and let his mind fill with recollections of the girl in whose company he had spent less than 6 hours over 2 days. She had been waiting for him yesterday evening, courteously early, just after the dinner hour. Daemon had pushed Doran's chair out to the gardens. Sansa was demurely seated on a rough stone bench. Her posture was beautiful, her hands folded correctly in her lap, her eyes cast down to avoid the curious stares of the women who passed, and the hungry stares of the men. One would not have known to look at her that she was in pain. From a distance, Sansa did not look nearly so young as she was. She was tall, her form womanly and graceful already. From a distance, she could easily be any age between 3 and 10 and 1 and 20. If, however, she chose to grant one the rare favor of looking into one's eyes, it was immediately apparent that she was little more than a babe in years. Or perhaps it was more apparent to Doran than it was to others. Grief and suffering had melted away the child softness of her face, leaving only high cheekbones and eyes the blue of Valyrian steel. Those eyes held little expression. They were like the wall, a sheer, slippery surface that could not be scaled easily. And like the wall, to look at those eyes was to grow curious what darkness, what danger lay beyond them. Lord Tyrion had talked a great deal about Sansa after she retired from their supper. He was in his cups, and he waxed sentimental. Beatings such as Doran had witnessed had apparently been a regular occurrence since Robb Stark was acclaimed king in the north. Sansa was not suspected of any treachery, Tyrion assured him. Even if she had been, her every move was watched, and according to her servants she did little but pray and walk in the gardens. The king ordered her beaten merely because it excited him to see her beaten. And Sansa never resisted the beatings, only wept. She knows that he likes to see her weeping, Tyrion had added, and Doran's feelings on the subject suddenly became more complicated. When Doran joined Sansa in the gardens, he had asked Daemon to leave them, and Sansa had instantly volunteered to push his chair. The offer had moved him. A strong man would grow tired pushing his chair over uneven, unpaved garden paths, and Sansa was only a child, and hurt besides. Instead, Doran had waited until they were the only 2 people on the garden path before rising from his chair and insisting that Sansa be seated in his place. Sansa had gawped at him. "I am quite able to walk," he had explained, smiling. "There is some pain, but the maesters say that I should take exercise from time to time. I only need something to lean on." He touched the ebony handles of his chair, to indicate that they would be adequate support. Sansa had still been reluctant, and in the end Doran had had to take her hand and gently guide her into the seat himself. Then he had asked her where they might talk privately, and Sansa had hesitated, then mentioned the Godswood. The Godswood was in the most distant part of the gardens, a circle of trees with a great weirwood in its midst. Doran was fascinated. He had never seen any of the ancient white and red trees or their carved, bleeding faces before. "Do you spend much time praying here?" Doran had asked, lifting a hand to the face, not quite able to touch it. "I come every morning and night," said Sansa. Doran gave her a quick sideways glance. "But not to pray." Sansa looked at her hands. "No one else comes here," she says. "No one else keeps to the old gods." Lord Tyrion had assured him that the girl was watched at every moment. Clearly, her watchers were less vigilant, or Sansa was cleverer, than Tyrion realized. "Would it be improper if I took a seat here?" said Doran, indicating a jutting length of tree root that was bowed in the center, worn nearly smooth by centuries of human touch. Sansa shook her head, and Doran sat. "I think you were frightened of me when you came to dinner last evening," he said. Sansa's eyes widened, but she did not reply, because Doran had phrased it as a statement, not a question, and she was careful, this maiden. "Are you less frightened of me now?" he said, trying to make his voice as neutral as possible. Sansa took her time choosing how to answer. "I am frightened of Joffrey," she said. "Because he is king. If he were not king, if he were only a highborn boy, I would not fear him. He would still be cruel, but would not be able to do so much harm." She hesitated. "I think that you, my prince, would still be able to do much, even if you were not a High Lord. But I do not think you are cruel." Doran stared at Sansa for a long moment. She offered him only her profile, and after a moment she bent her head again, which made her hair fall like curtains on either side of her face. "Do you fear nothing, save cruelty?" he asked, when he had composed himself again. "It isn't the cruelty, so much as the not knowing." Sansa wrung her hands together, a soothing, repetitive motion. "What happened yesterday, if it happened every day, it would be different. But it isn't every day. He ignores me a great deal of the time. It should be a relief when he ignores me, but it isn't. I'm always waiting for the next time." "Unpredictability," said Doran. "Chaos. These, you fear?" "I think so, my prince. When you don't know what is to come, it makes it difficult, deciding how to act." She looked at him then, quite unexpectedly, and Doran lost his breath for a moment. "Sometimes I think that hope is worse than fear." "Certainly. Hopes that not likely to be realized are a lingering pain in the soul." "It is not always easy to tell the difference between a true hope and a false one," she said, still holding his gaze. Doran considered his words carefully. "How would you tell the difference between a false hope and a true?" Sansa looked back down at her hands. "Men prove their worth by their actions. I suppose the same is true of hopes. We give them a chance, and then they come to pass, or they don't." "It is a hard thing," said Doran softly, "to give hope a chance, after it has disappointed you so many times." Sansa blinked a few times. "Hopelessness is harder," she said. "Life without hope is impossible." Doran had gently steered the conversation on two necessary topics after that. He knew little about Sansa Stark, much less than he should have known before betrothing her to his own son, and though it would have been more meet to question her guardians, he thought Sansa more trustworthy. Had she heard aught from her lady mother since her brother Robb was acclaimed king in the north? She had not. What of the Maester of Winterfell, or its Castellan, or her brothers Bran and Rickon? She had heard nothing from any of them, but she was not allowed to write letters, and she thought that, if any had been sent to her, the Queen must have kept them. Did Sansa feel that the Queen had done her duty, caring for her, since making her a member of her own household? Sansa seemed to feel that the Queen was straining generosity to the breaking point by allowing her food and house room, and, of course, by not having her head cut off. Sansa knew the Queen better than Doran did, of course. He was willing to entertain the possibility that, coming from Cersei Lannister, this was extraordinary generosity. When the crickets began to sing their evening song, Doran began inquiring into her taste in reading, hoping to gain some sense of the education she had received. He discovered that she was a romantic, a secret one. She had learned to hide away her shy hunger for gallantry and chivalry once she realized that such graces would not be extended to the likes of her, not here. She told him frankly that she thought it was better for a monarch to be loved than feared, yet it did not sound like a child's pious mummery, but more like an assessment born of observation. It was borne in upon Doran suddenly that this child, shortly to be a member of his own household, knew more about the King of Westeros than any other person alive. He would think Lord Tyrion a fool for letting her go, but he knew that Tyrion had a romantic streak of his own, at least where the girl was concerned. Sansa Stark was probably the only woman who had ever had any use for the dwarf's chivalry. "I would ask you to answer me this question truly," Doran said. "I will not say honestly, for I do not think it in your nature to lie. But I have no need of courtesies, only frankness. Do you wish to leave King's Landing and make your home in Dorne?" She had fidgeted and looked through the copse of sacred trees to the cliff beyond and the bay below. "The last time I set out on a long journey to a strange land, I lost everything," she said. "I do not think I have much to lose anymore." "No," thought Doran. "Only your last hope." But he said nothing. There was no need. He understood her now, better, by far, than he had hoped to when he invited her to speak with him that evening. It was curious that she had brought him to the Godswood. These trees, no doubt, had heard many of her silent prayers, and the ground been watered by her tears. They might have conversed just as privately in a September, but she had chosen to face him in the presence of her own gods, not his. Doran was no great believer in the gods, but he could not escape a certain sense of presence in that place. Oberyn, who was far more pious than he, would probably feel bound to make some sort of holy vow, not to fail the fragile trust that Sansa was placing in him. But Doran did not make vows. He made plans. Suddenly, he found that he had many plans for Sansa Stark. When the sun set, they made their way back to the Red Keep, and Sansa had insisted on trading places in the chair with him before they were very far away from the Godswood. After all she had said, her tones a mixture of mischief and breathtaking artlessness, "You don't want anyone out there to know how well you can truly walk." Sir Daemon was waiting for them when they reached the courtyard. Doran had asked Sansa for the honor of escorting her back to her chambers. He intended for Daemon to stand the first watch, guarding her door that night, and it was as convenient a way of delivering him there as any. One last thing Doran had said, before parting from her. "Are you certain that you are strong enough to begin this journey tomorrow? It may keep another day or two, if need be." Sansa had looked up and down the corridors, and her shoulders hunched nervously before she replied. "If only it will get me away from this place, I am strong enough to swim to dawn. My prince." Doran had been startled into laughter. Sansa had flushed, then smiled. It was the first true smile Doran had yet seen from her, and like a flash of heat lightning it illuminated the sweetness, the vulnerability, and the sorrow she normally concealed in the darkness behind her eyes. For a brief but fervent moment, Doran had wished that she could be married to Quentyn. His son would be well suited to her. And as her own good father, Doran would never be very far from her. "In the morning, I will be present at the dock, to introduce you to my brother and see you safely aboard your ship," Doran had said. "Sleep well, my lady." "I shall, my prince." She had given him a strange, intense look. "Thank you," she had said, and there was something in her manner of speaking that made that pronouncement different from the dozen or so "I thank you my lord princes" she had already spoke to him during the course of their short acquaintance. Sansa was meant to depart from a small dock inside the Red Keep just after dawn the following morning, but when Doran opened his eyes the following day the sun had fully risen, and there was a smell of smoke in the air. He had peered through the light, trying to clear the cobwebs that the potion always left clinging to his brain, when Lord Tyrion burst into his room unannounced. "I am sorry to wake you, Prince Doran, but something has happened. It is a matter which urgently requires your attention." "Why was I not awakened earlier?" said Doran, looking at the slant of the light pouring in through the windows. "I am afraid that I have made a terrible mistake," Tyrion said without answering the question. "But first, let me assure you that only 10 minutes ago I saw Sansa safely aboard your brother's ship. They will make port at Sandy Wedge Harbor in some 3 hours' time. If it is your will, a fast courier should arrive in time to reach them." "And why should I send a courier to my brother?" said Doran blearily. Lord Tyrion took a deep breath, and it made his chest puff up like a little boy trying not to cry. In the early hours of the morning, the king discovered that his betrothal to Lady Sansa had been broken and that she was promised to another. He burst into her chambers while she was still abed and set fire to her bedclothes. The dwarf looked like death, and there were reddish patches, like mild burns, on the backs and palms of his hands. Doran stared at his hands for a long moment before lifting his eyes, waiting for him to continue. "Sansa was not, thank the gods, seriously injured, I don't think. But I had to move very quickly to get her out of the keep before Joffrey did something even more drastic. There was no time to get her to a maester, or even to pack her belongings. I thought it prudent to tell Prince Oberyn the bare minimum, until you had the opportunity to communicate with him." Doran was no longer tired in the slightest. He glanced into the corner of the room, where his maester stood waiting with a tray, and beckoned him forward. He put one leg out of bed, and then the gouty one, which seemed to pain him less this morning than it usually did. "Explain this to me again, if you please, my lord hand," said Doran. "I am old, and in the mornings my wits are slow." The maester handed him a tumbler of lemon water, and Doran drank it all, then, very deliberately, set the glass down on the table. Explain to me how mine own promised good daughter came to be burned in her very bed, but 2 days after I had received her into my household and my protection. Explain to me what happened to the guards I posted outside her doors last night. And once you have explained these things to me, I hope you will explain what amends the crown intends to make to Dawn for the attempted murder of a princess of House Martell. Tyrion's face turned deathly white. We take these matters seriously, you see, said Doran easily, shrugging into his dressing gown. History has taught us the peril of doing otherwise. I do not deny that it is a most serious matter, said Tyrion, between gritted teeth. Then perhaps you need time to think over your response and discuss these serious matters with the small council. Doran looked away, taking up the tumbler glass again. Thank you for the information you have provided, Lord Tyrion. We shall speak again soon. Doran did not watch Lord Tyrion depart. He heard the door close behind him, and then a sudden grinding and cracking noise, as cool liquid rushed over his hand. My prince, cried his maester. Your hand. Doran glanced down at the remnants of the shattered drinking glass caught between his fingers and his palm. A thin trickle of blood mixed with lemon water and ran down the sleeve of his housecoat. Doran had allowed the master to fuss over and wrap the minor cuts and help him into his chair. Then he dismissed him and took up his writing desk and began his letter to Oberyn. The letter to Sansa was difficult. In the first draft, he found himself offering excuses, only to discard it, because excuses did not befit princes who had promised their protection to maidens who had been so often betrayed by powerful men. The second draft had begun with more promises, but Sansa's words in the Godswood had come back to him, men prove themselves in their actions. The third draft was discarded because Doran had only known Sansa for 2 days, and it was not appropriate for a man in his position to ask such a maiden to relieve his anxieties, however delicately couched his inquiries were. Doran took up his pen and began the fourth draft by offering Sansa the only gift of worth that still lay in his power to give her, honesty. Once had resolved on this course, his fluency returned to him, and he managed to pen a satisfactory missive in an appropriate space of time. Afterwards, when the letter was scrolled, sealed, and imprinted, he called for the captain of his guard to take charge of it. The servants and messengers of the Red Keep were scarcely to be trusted, after all. Hotter would do whatever he must to see that Doran's instructions were carried out. After all was concluded, Doran rang for his secretary and instructed him to arrange for all the bannermen, all the lords and heirs and scions who had accompanied him to King's Landing, to attend a private supper at a location situated some distance from the Red Keep. He left it to the secretary to scout an appropriate location, requesting only that it also contain chambers adequate to maintain himself and his household for the duration of their stay in the capital. He would remain in the Red Keep no longer. He could not flout the king's hospitality overtly, but he could make it plain in the eyes of all observers that he considered Joffrey unreliable. And he would need to consult with his people in private, or whatever passed for privacy in this city full of spies. When all the arrangements had been made, Doran exited the Red Keep without fanfare, using his chair rather than his palanquin. On the way out, he made a point of stopping by Sansa's former chambers. The burnt bedclothes had been stripped away, the windows opened to air the smoke, and even her ruined wardrobe and possessions had been cleared away. Only the bare mattress on the bed remained as evidence of what had occurred there. Black scorch marks covered the goose-down sack on which Sansa had laid herself to rest the previous night. He found himself remembering what Sansa had said to him the night they dined together, when he had ordered that his palanquin would transport her back to her rooms. "My prince," she had whispered, white as a sheet, "the king will." Doran had interrupted her. "You will allow me to deal with the king," he had said. He had compassion for her fears, but she had been in Joffrey's power for so long that Doran had thought her terror of him exaggerated. With her betrothal to Quentyn sealed, it had seemed necessary, for Sansa's sake as well as his, to make some show of power. Doran remained there in Sansa's doorway, staring into her soot-stained chamber, for so long that his secretary grew visibly uncomfortable. Doran ignored him, and continued to stare a while longer. Chapter 7. Notes. AO3 is having some kind of screwy issue where it generates extra italics tags when I edit the post. I can seem to fix the formatting on the letters, which have randomly non-italicized bits in the middle. Chapter text. Sansa. A strong salt wind dragged a few strands of hair loose from Sangza's braid. Salt mist plastered them to the side of her face. The moon was low, and the creaks and groans of the ship's timbers were astonishingly loud, louder than the rush of the sea itself, on a night such as this. She held on to the railing and gazed out at the distant water. Maester Adrian had forbidden her to spend more than a few minutes out on the deck when the sun was shining, but it was the hour before dawn now, and the sun would not burn her through her new silk gown for a long while yet. The Lady Jane was due to reach Sunspear on the morrow. They had been sailing for 3 weeks. Sangza had spent the first 12 days abed in her cabin. It was a pretty little cabin, a far cry from the spare, narrow berth on Nymaria's Sun where Prince Oberyn had bestowed her the morning of their departure. She had only been aboard Nymaria's Sun for a few hours, but they had been memorable hours, marked by searing pain and paralyzing terror. I did not think to live, Sangza reminded herself, gazing out at the far blue water, where dolphins sometimes leapt and dived amongst the white-capped waves. Yet here I stand. I have done all that Prince Doran asked of me. I grow hale, I grow strong, and soon I will be in Dorne. The letter she had received from Prince Doran in Sandy Wedge was creased and smooth from the number of times that Sangza had unfolded it, reread it, and put it back between the pages of the book she kept it in. She read it almost every single day, though she could scarcely have said why. Most days, she read it just after she woke from dreaming about the fire. The flames always consumed her in her dreams. Yet waking was almost worse than dreaming, because, in the first instant after she opened her eyes, she always expected to see Joffrey standing over her with the torch. Today, she had taken her letter and slipped from her cabin to breathe fresh air and reassure herself that the warships of the Royal Navy weren't bearing down on them in the darkness. She'd escaped the Red Keep, thanks to Lord Tyrion, but not before Joffrey had threatened to have her pursued. On mornings like this, nothing but reading Prince Doran's letter made it possible for Sangza to breathe through the fear. She took the parchment from the pocket of her cloak and unfolded it, careful not to let the wind snatch it from her hands. My time for writing is brief, and so too must this letter be, too brief, indeed, to contain all that I would wish to express. I have not forgotten that you cautioned me to be wary of the king's wrath. I failed to heed your wise counsel, and now I learn that you have been made to pay the price of my folly. Lord Tyrion says that the injuries inflicted upon you are not grave in nature. I pray this is so, but it is not my nature to trust solely in prayer. My brother Oberyn will guard and cherish you as if you were his own blood. If there is anything that might bring you comfort, only name it, and Oberyn will see it done. I know you to be a most dutiful lady, and thus I ask this service of you: heal, grow strong, and meet me when I come again to Dorne. She took a deep breath and folded the letter again, holding it tight against her chest for a moment before tucking it back into her pocket. Sangza was improving, but she was not yet whole. Every morning the Maester came to her cabin and changed the yards of tight bandages wound round her body. She was healing at an acceptable rate, he told her, but the bandages would have to stay on at least a week longer. And there would be scars. There was nothing that the Maester or anyone else could do about that, so Sangza tried not to think about it too much. She was past the danger of succumbing to a fever, so unless the ship sank, she would live to see dawn, as Prince Doran had asked. That was all that truly mattered now. She would live, and when Prince Doran returned to Sunspear with Myrcella, Sangza would ask him for permission to write to Mother with news of her betrothal. Sangza wasn't entirely certain where Mother and Robb were at the moment, but a letter addressed to her uncle at Riverrun would find its way to them eventually. The sound of voices in the distance made Sangza tense on reflex. She shouldn't be out here alone in the darkness without Lyra, the maid who had joined them at Sandy Wedge, along with Maester Adrian, and 6 extra guards. But she had found that no one seemed to care much what she did here on the ship. It was nothing like the Red Keep, where her every move had been watched. No doubt Prince Oberyn realized that there was little harm she could do from a small vessel in the middle of the Sea of Dawn, especially when she was still recovering. In Sunspear, she would have to mind herself closely once more, but in the meantime, she was grateful for the freedom. Lady Sangza. She hears light boot steps against the deck just behind her. Why are you not in your cabin? Is aught amiss? She turned, trying not to cringe with guilt, to see Prince Oberyn frowning at her through the dim light. No, my prince, she said. I happened to wake early, that is all. Shall I wake Adrian? If the pain keeps you from sleep. Not at all, she said quickly. Truly, I no longer feel much pain. Prince Oberyn continued to frown at her, unconvinced. I had a bad dream, she admitted. There is no need to wake the Maester. Ah. His face cleared, and he came to stand next to her at the railing, looking out upon the miles of dark water that stretched before them. In that case, I will join you for a moment. I always need company after I have bad dreams. Sansa's small, quiet ow of surprise made him give her a quick glance, a small smile on his lips. In my nightmares, I usually find myself back in the Red Keep. We have that in common, perhaps. She wasn't sure how to answer, so she didn't. Or perhaps your dreams look to the future, not the past. Sansa could only blink at him. Are you anxious what will happen when we reach Sunspear? She wasn't sure how to answer that either, but she couldn't just stand there like a mute when he kept asking her questions. In her experience, princes didn't like it much when she did that. I am looking forward to seeing Dorne, she said. I am sure it will be very different to anything I have ever seen before. Yes, he said, and the single word was somehow heavy with meaning. You will find it very different to what you have been used to. Sansa nodded, because that seemed safest. What did Doran tell you? You had little opportunity to speak with him, I know, but I hope he took the time to answer some of your questions. No, Sansa thought, but then, she couldn't recall asking Prince Doran any questions. As you say, my prince, we had little chance to speak. We did meet privately once, but, for the most part, Prince Doran asked questions of me. Prince Oberyn laughed. That is also usually the case when I have audiences with my brother. It suits him to listen while others speak. Well, I shall have to provide what my brother lacked. Ask your questions of me and I shall do my best to answer them. To Sansa's dismay, her mind was instantly swept blank. She had to stare out over the water for a long time before she could think of any questions at all. Will it be very long before I meet Prince Quentyn? He grew sober. Yes, I am afraid so. It may be several years. But then, you are only 2 and 10, are you not? You should be older before you marry. I would allow no daughter of mine to wed at such an age. Sansa had no desire to be married yet either, but she would like the chance to get to know her future husband before it was time to wed him. On the other hand, she'd had plenty of time to get to know Joffrey, and it had only made her dread their wedding. Perhaps it was better not to know anything about Prince Quentyn in advance. But she could not say so to Prince Oberyn. She doubted he would be pleased if she compared his nephew to Joffrey. Are any of your daughters married? Sansa asked, genuinely curious. Back when Sansa was unable to leave her bed, Prince Oberyn had come to her cabin for a long visit at least twice a day. During those visits, he'd told her many stories about his daughters, particularly the eldest 4, all of whom had different mothers. Sansa had lain abed many days, concentrating on the sound of Prince Oberyn's voice to help keep the pain at bay. He had told her about Oberyn, who was mistress of the spear and one of the best riders in Dorne, Lady Nymeria, whose mother was of the oldest blood in Far Volantis, Tyon, to whom Oberyn had passed along his knowledge of potions and poisons, and Sarilla, to whom he seemed to have passed along his knowledge of everything else. His younger 4 were all Sansa's age or younger, and their mother was his paramour, Ellaria Sand. She hadn't quite had the nerve to ask what a paramour was, it wasn't something her scepter had seen fit to explain when she was teaching her lord's children about the great houses of Dorne, but Sansa knew what a Sand was. Judging from the pride and affection in his voice when he spoke of his family, Prince Oberyn wasn't the least bit ashamed to be the father of so many bastards. It made Sansa think guiltily of Jon. Growing up, she had heard whispers from some of the older servants at Winterfell that Jon's mother was Dornish. Would he have been happier growing up a Sand than he had been as a Snow? She was glad that Prince Oberyn did not know anything about her life at Winterfell. He had promised to introduce her to all of his girls, but she doubted he would have been as excited by the prospect if he knew how bastards had been treated in her mother's household. No, none of my girls are wed. They are free to do so if they wish, but I never insisted upon it. Quite the opposite. If they wed, they would leave me, and I would be lost without them. He heaved a sigh. Although Sarilla may leave me soon in any case. She has a scheme in her head, to spend some time studying in Old Town. I gave her my leave, but my brother is still thinking about it. I don't think he wants her to go away either. She is uncommonly clever, Sarala. Useful to have around when there is a question you need answered without listening to a lecture from the maesters. They do seem to enjoy their lectures, Sangza allowed. She would be due for one herself this morning if she didn't get back to her cabin before Maester Adrian came to change her bandages. Prince Oberyn grinned. Adrian is something of a tyrant. I knew him, when I was at the Citadel. He was long-winded and pedantic even then. Brilliant, though. I knew you would be in safe hands. The pain is easing, you said. Yes, my prince. The Maester says I should be healed entirely within the fortnight. He tells me the same. My brother will be most gratified. He blames himself for what befell you. You have been made to pay the price of my folly. I hope that is not true. It was none of his doing. Doran of all people should know better than to doubt when he is warned that a king is mad. There was a harsh note in the prince's voice that Sangza did not quite understand, and somehow it emboldened her to speak. I do not know that I would call Joffrey mad. No. Perhaps you are right. Men of sound mind can be crueler than madmen. He smiled suddenly. But good men, sometimes they dare cruelties that others cannot dream, when they act in defense of their own. Sangza hadn't the faintest idea what she was supposed to make of that, but it sounded alarming. We will stay at the old palace in Sunspear until the Maester says you are recovered, and then I think you will go to stay at the Water Gardens. That is where Doran spends most of his time, and my younger girls too. Myrcella will remain at the palace with Tristan and his sister and myself. I have heard the Water Gardens are very beautiful, Sangza said, her voice faltering slightly. She had assumed that Prince Oberyn would remain close by when they reached Dorne. But of course, Prince Doran had only given her into his charge for the duration of their sea voyage. My brother Oberyn will guard and cherish you as if you were his own blood. Sangza remembered thinking once that the Red Viper would sooner strangle her and throw her overboard than see his nephew married to Lyanna Stark's niece, but he had been more than courteous to her, even warm. They are indeed most beautiful. I grew up there myself, as every prince and princess of my house has done since Daenerys Targaryen wed Prince Maron. Even now I visit at least once a fortnight, to consult with Doran and see the girls. Sangza tried not to let her relief show. At least he will not disappear. Nor Sir Demon. And when we reach Sunspear, you shall send a raven to your lady mother, to tell her of these beauties. She looked at him, startled. Truly? Would I be permitted? Of course. Do you not recall? You asked me, many days ago, and I said that the news of your betrothal should not be kept from your family. He frowned at her. Sangza did not recall. There was a veil in her memories, dividing the first few days of their voyage from all that came after. She could dimly remember their arrival in Sandy Wedge, opening her eyes to find Prince Oberyn leaning over her, his expression tight and worried, as though he'd been trying unsuccessfully to wake her for a long time. He'd tried to be gentle when he carried her from her cabin to the litter that was waiting to take her to the Lady Jane, but the potions he'd given her had dulled her wits more than they had dulled the pain, and she'd fainted shortly after he deposited her on the narrow pallet. Sangza remembered thinking it strange, how much worse the pain was, suddenly, than it had been before. She'd been numb that morning in the Red Keep when Tyrion threw a cloak over her and commanded her to lean on his shoulder, numb as they walked ahead of Sir Demon and his brothers in arms to the dock where Prince Oberyn awaited them. Tyrion's words had frozen her blood, that was why she couldn't feel anything. I cannot contain Joffrey for long, he'd hissed at her. If not for the fact that his legs were so short, she never could have kept up with his furious strides. Forget your clothes, forget your books. You will be a princess of Dorne soon, you will want for nothing. Forgive me, she said. I don't remember much about those first few days. Prince Oberyn's expression tightened, but his mouth was soft. Perhaps that is best. Your suffering was dreadful to witness, though you bore it with all the dignity of a queen. Sangza's cheeks grew hot, and she was grateful that he could not see her blush in the darkness. I confess, I wondered greatly at my brother's decision when he wrote to tell me that he had betrothed you to Quentyn. It is most unlike him to make important decisions so hastily. I wondered less when Demon told me of the scene that greeted my brother in the throne room upon his arrival, but I did not truly understand until I had known you for a few days. For a maiden of your years, you have the most remarkable composure. It had been so long since anyone had praised her so freely that Sansa hadn't any idea what to say. You are too kind, Prince Oberyn. I am not known for my kindness. He grinned. Ask anyone. My reputation is well established. Sansa permitted herself a delicate sniff. You have been kindness itself to me, so I will have difficulty believing anyone's report to the contrary. Prince Oberyn's grin turned into a soft smile, and his hand came to rest on her shoulder, the one that wasn't wrapped in bandages under her clothes. One day, kindness will not seem so remarkable to you. My brother has made you a part of our family, and we are good to our own. So you will write to your mother when we reach Sunspear. She will have the comfort of knowing that the Lannisters can do you no more harm, and when she writes back to you, you will have the comfort of her counsel, which you have no doubt sorely missed since the death of your lord father. Sansa hesitated for a long moment, but the prince's warmth made her bold. If the king were to learn that a raven had travelled from Sunspear to Riverrun, would he not think it treason? She was being delicate. She knew full well that Joffrey would consider it treason. It is no treason for a maiden to write to her mother to say that she is going to be married. And that is what Doran will tell the king if he is foolish enough to ask. The wind was very chill this morning. They were very near to Dorne, and Sansa had thought Dorne a warm country, but the nights at sea were as cold as any in King's Landing. I hope very much that he would not say so to Joffrey's face. Else he will lose a head, and I will be to blame. Again. Prince Oberyn snorted, but then he seemed to sense her unease. His hand, still gripping her shoulder warmly, tightened its grip. Never fear. Doran has all the caution and prudence that I lack. He will make his plans, and keep his counsel, and return safely to Dorne with Princess Myrcella. I am looking forward to seeing him again. So I gathered. Tell me, what sweet words did Doran write to you, that you read them so often? Sansa felt a bolt of completely inexplicable panic, and her eyes must have widened comically, because Prince Oberyn laughed. It is no matter to me, he said. If he was able to say aught to bring you comfort, I am glad for it. But Doran is a man of few words, so I wondered that he managed as much. He only expressed his wish that I should recover my strength, Sansa said, a little stiffly. But she found it impossible not to explain herself further. I never had a friend in King's Landing until the day I met him. Lord Tyrion tried to be kind, but if it weren't for Prince Doran I would still be there. Then we must both be grateful to my brother, I suppose. Although I think it would be more fitting to congratulate him. In a matter of days, he managed to betroth both of his sons to the sisters of kings, and both of them younger sons, at that. Sansa gripped the railing, her whole body suddenly tense and tight. She inhaled sharply, and Prince Oberyn frowned. In King's Landing, she said, no one ever called Robb a king. She avoided his eyes. He was only a traitor, like my father, and I had the traitor's blood. Prince Oberyn was quiet for a long moment. He stood looking out over the water with his hand on her shoulder, so close to her that she was warmed by the warmth of this body, and when he at last spoke, she could tell that he had chosen his words with greater care than was usually his wont. When this War of the Five Kings began, it was Doran's ruling that Dorne should have no part in it. The north is far away, as is Dragonstone, and Dorne has been at war with the Reach many times over the centuries. Wait and see, Doran said, and in the meantime, we are the king's loyal subjects. Then, of course, he received Lord Tyrion's proposal that Myrcella be wed to Tristan. Excellent timing, on the imp's part. A handsome reward for Dorne's friendship to the Iron Throne. His smile was crooked. But since we will be home soon, you might as well know, in Dorne, we are loyal to ourselves. It was strange, Sansa thought, that after so many months of being considered as good as a traitor, guarding every action and every word so as to remain above suspicion, she could stand here and listen so calmly while Prince Oberyn spoke treason to her. I suppose that explains a few things, she said quietly. He looked amused. Does it? Sansa thought of Sir Daemon, and Maester Miles, both of them replying to her warnings about Joffrey by saying that they served Prince Doran. She thought of Prince Doran saying, allow me to deal with the king. What will happen to Myrcella if Lord Stannis should be victorious? She did not mention her brother. Robb was not interested in the Iron Throne. But it was the closest she could come to asking what would become of her, should Robb be defeated. Nothing, said Prince Oberyn, without a moment's hesitation. She is not to blame for her family's crimes. You are both under my brother's protection. Sansa could only nod. Come, he said, tugging slightly on her shoulder. I will see you back to your cabin. It wouldn't do for the Maester to find us here, or we shall incur one of his lectures. She took his arm when he offered it, and allowed him to open the cabin door for her. Lyra was still asleep within, thankfully. She was a dreadful snitch when it came to making certain Sansa followed the Maester's orders. We shall reach Sunspear by nightfall, he said. Try to get some more sleep. It will be the last you sleep in that bed. Thank the gods, Sansa thought, then wondered when she had stopped dreading their arrival in Dorne and began awaiting it with eagerness. Asterisk. Doran. Thank you for joining me, Princess, said Doran, once Myrcella had been seated at his breakfast table. Your scepter tells me you are feeling better today. Yes, my prince, I am much better, she says. She paused for a moment, then adds, the captain says I have my sea legs now. Doran smiled. The Queen said you were a good sailor, and fond of the open water. Still, a long sea voyage takes a hard toll. I myself am quite unused to it, though I travelled enough when I was a younger man. They were now a week upon the water, and though Doran had never been fond of long sea voyages, even when he was young, he breathed easier with so much open water between the Maiden's Reed and King's Landing. He had been obliged to spend 2 weeks in the capital, attending feasts in honor of Myrcella and Tristan's betrothal, and that week had been full of tensions. The abrupt dissolution of Sansa Stark's betrothal to the king had been the subject of furious, breathless gossip wherever Doran seemed to go. Everyone knew about the fire. Some thought that Sansa, desperate with grief, had started it herself, hoping to perish in the flames rather than be parted from the king she loved. Others said she had preferred to be burnt alive rather than take a Dornish husband, a view to which some members of his household had taken some offense. Yet a surprising number of people seemed to know that the fire was the king's doing, and Doran had noted with interest that 2 of Tywin Lannister's bannermen with eligible daughters near the king's age had quit the capital suddenly. Lord Tyrion had found it all quite nerve-wracking. Doran had sympathized with his anxieties, even as his people continued to whisper the truth into any pair of listening ears they could find. Whether the seeds his own bannermen were planting would take root or not, Doran could not guess. He knew only that the Lannisters were as poor in true loyalty as they were rich in gold. Most men feared them, many profited by them, but none loved them. As a consequence, the throne that Tywin Lannister had won for his family sat on foundations of clay, and clay could only withstand so many tremors before it crumbled back into sand. Dornishmen, it was well known, were sure-footed on sand. I saw dolphins when I left my cabin, said Myrcella, spreading soft white cheese over a piece of flatbread. I didn't know what they were at first. The captain told me. He said that sometimes, when a sailor falls overboard, dolphins will bear him up so that he does not drown. Is that true? Doran smiled. I have also heard that said, though I have never seen it myself. Myrcella was only a few years younger than Sansa, but there was a wide gulf of experience and sorrow between the little girl of almost 10 and the maiden of not quite 3 and 10. The princess was less abashed, less fearful of setting a foot wrong than Sansa, and she had been more grieved to leave her old home than frightened of what awaited her in the new one. Doran had paid careful attention to Myrcella since their voyage began, curious whether she had anything in common with her brother the king, but so far he had seen nothing to give him alarm. Rather the contrary, though she carried herself like a princess, not a hostage, there had been moments when she exhibited some of Sansa's wariness, and Doran reflected that though Sansa had been betrothed to the king for many months, Myrcella had been his sister all her life. She had not cried when taking leave of her family, but there was sorrow in her eyes when she kissed her mother and little Prince Tommen. There had been none when she kissed Joffrey. Does Prince Tristan like the water? Has he ever seen a dolphin? She was a bright, pretty child, courteous and curious and not unbecomingly proud. Tristan would take to her quickly, Doran had no doubt. It eased his mind to know that his youngest child, at least, would grow up alongside his betrothed, that there would be years of trust and affection between them by the time they were wed. Such was the best foundation for happiness in marriage, he believed. Love alone was nothing compared to trust, as he had learned it to his own cost. Tristan swims capably. Like all my children, he grew up in the water gardens. But he is not the waterman you are, princess. You will have to teach him. She grinned, as if charmed by the notion of teaching a boy who was nearly a man grown. Myrcella would enjoy the water gardens too, and she was not yet too old for them. But Doran meant to keep her in Sunspear, because that was where Tristan lived, and because the water gardens were where he intended to establish Sangza. Myrcella seemed to admire the older girl, but through no fault of her own her company was likely to remind Sangza of dark days past. Doran meant for Sangza to have a long, untroubled convalescence from her time in King's Landing. Afterwards, if she wished it, she and Myrcella might be reunited. When the meal was finished, Myrcella bobbed a curtsy and all but skipped away from the table, trailed by her reproving Septa. He thought she was probably on her way to find the ship's cat and spoil him with morsels stolen from the table. The sailors said that the fat old monster wasn't catching as many rats these days, and Doran thought he knew whom to blame. After the servants had cleared the table, Doran took up his walking stick and hobbled across the room to his writing desk. There, he took out the letter he had received from Oberyn, and unfolded it along well-worn creases. He'd read it over several times already, but he kept returning to it, as though some part of him hoped to find the contents altered. Many thanks for your timely letter and the timelier provisions. I indeed discovered that our most precious cargo had been badly damaged before it was carried aboard ship, and I greatly wondered how such had come to pass. I mended all that I could, to some small avail. Luckily, here aboard the Lady Jane there travels a skilled craftsman who has agreed to enter your service. He will keep close watch, and preserve your treasure if he can. All your instructions shall be dutifully attended to. Never fear but that all those you care for shall meet you in dawn upon our return. Regarding your treasure, a certain person, one of those most nearly concerned in the case, has expressed doubt lest the damage should decrease the desirability of anyone's possessing it. I assured this person that it would not be less precious to you for a little scorching, but when we meet again perhaps you might convey that sentiment yourself. Doran did not trust Tyrion Lannister, but he had believed him when he said that Sansa's injuries were not grave. He did not think the dwarf would have packed her off to Oberyn without a maester if he had known her to be in serious danger. He cherished tender feelings towards the maiden, Doran believed, and no doubt would have married her himself if he had dared stretch his hand to grasp such high fruit. Oberyn was citadel trained, better able than Lord Tyrion to assess the seriousness of Sansa's condition. Badly damaged had a terrifying ring to it, coming from Oberyn, all the more so, since the timing of their separate voyages meant that Doran could not hope to receive further news of Sansa until he was again in Sunspear. Still, Doran knew his brother well enough to know that he would not have sent assurances if he had believed the case to be hopeless. Between Oberyn and the no doubt well-qualified maester he had pressed into his service, Sansa would be in capable hands. As to the last few sentences, they troubled Doran as well, but they had not surprised him. Fire disfigured. Doran had known there would be lasting damage, but were she as hideous as Sandor Clegane, she would still be Eddard Stark's eldest daughter, gracious and sweet-natured, dutiful and intelligent. If the unlikely should come to pass, and Quentyn should indeed marry Sansa, his son would think nothing of her scars, save that he would be grieved for the hurt done to her. And if, in the fullness of time, Doran should have to find some other husband for her, he would choose with the utmost care. He would not bestow her on anyone unworthy. I assured this person that it would not be less precious to you for a little scorching. Did Sansa truly believe that he would look upon her when he returned to Dorne and pack her back to Lannisters because she was forever marked by the king's cruelty? She would come to know him better than that, he hoped. Oberyn's advice was rarely given save in jest, but if his brother believed that assurances from his mouth would quiet Sansa's fears, she would have them. He did not mean to part with Sansa Stark for a long time. I pray the gods I have not been unknowingly parted from her already, he thought, and gazed out the window of his cabin at the distant waves, willing to wind to bear all its fury down on the sails. If he was fortunate, he would see Dorne, and his brother, and Sansa, in 2 weeks. They would feel longer than that, to him. Chapter 8. Chapter text. Oberyn. Every courtier of rank in Sunspear was gathered by the gates of the outer ward of the old palace, awaiting the appearance of their prince, whose long journey from King's Landing across the Sea of Dawn was nearly at an end. They had all of them been waiting out here in the heat for more than half an hour, while Doran's litter crept slowly closer. Obera had eventually sat herself down on the sandstone steps and begun whittling the end of a stick into a sharp point. Sarala was tucked knees up in the shadows of a great pillar, her nose between the pages of an enormous book. Oberyn would rather have liked to join her, but a Prince of Dawn had appearances to maintain. Besides, Sansa stood at his right hand, listing against him slightly, and if Oberyn left her on her own, she might well collapse before submitting to the indignity of seating herself upon the ground with so many people looking on. Oberyn cast a discreet glance from Sansa, at his right, to Tristan, who stood at his left. His nephew would, no doubt, be only too glad to support Sansa in Oberyn's place. There had been some confusion when first the Lady Jane arrived in Sunspear. After all, no one had been expecting the arrival of two new brides for House Martell. When Tristan first came out to greet them 2 weeks ago, he had taken Sansa for none other than Princess Myrcella. Sansa was clearly older, and her hair was copper, not golden, but Tristan had seen nothing but her beauty. By the time introductions had been made and the misunderstanding cleared up, poor Tristan had looked fairly crushed, as though he were already a fair way towards falling in love with his brother's betrothed. Today, Tristan was arrayed in his best finery, as suited a prince waiting to greet the arrival of his betrothed princess. But he was nervous, and Oberyn did not blame him. Were he free to choose, Oberyn had no doubt he would have preferred to claim the hand of the maiden beside him. She, after all, was no stranger to him any longer, and her age was more of a match for his. For his nephew Sake, Oberyn hoped that the little Lannister princess was indeed the budding beauty she was reported to be, and that she had a gentle heart besides. If so, Oberyn trusted that Tristan would get over his disappointment soon enough. And in the meantime, poor Quentyn is off courting his dragon lady on the far side of the narrow sea, never knowing that Doran has already claimed a gentle beauty in his name, a maiden who would share his love of poems and songs, and grace all the long years of his life with her companionship. If only princes could choose. It was most unfair to the both of them, and Oberyn was not looking forward to the day when Sansa would have to be informed that the husband she had been promised would never be hers. She had suffered enough disappointment in her short life already. Yet Doran would find some means of making it up to her, Oberyn was sure. Doran was anything but unfeeling towards Sansa. That letter he had sent, Oberyn knew better than most that Doran spoke least when his anger burned hottest. Yet his letter to Oberyn had been positively terse. Minutes passed. The sun burned hotter, even under the shaded canopy that blocked the fiercest of the sun's rays from beating down on their heads. Oberyn was just on the verge of ordering that benches and fans be summoned, for the sake of the ladies, when the guards cried out, "The Prince of Dawn." Sansa straightened suddenly, no longer leaning against Oberyn's arm. He looked down at her as she clasped her hands and stared at the ground. "What is it?" he said. "Are you well, Sansa?" The question was sheer habit, by now. Her wounds were healed to the limits of the maester's skill. Oberyn had been permitted a glimpse of her back when the last of the bandages were finally removed, and he had seen for himself that the flesh was again whole, though the scars that had knit it together were fearful to see, red and tender and whirled like tree bark. She was long past the danger of her injuries, but Oberyn continued to worry for her peace of mind. To be sure, whenever she was asked, Sansa claimed that she was perfectly content, but her flinches and startled gestures spoke for themselves. Alone, with him or Arianne or Ellaria or any of his daughters, she could be relaxed, even cheerful. Yet in a crowd such as this, she had a tendency to efface herself, to all but disappear in plain sight. At such times, Oberyn made it a point to stay close to her, unless duty called him away, and then he sent Daemon to stand at her back. She was safe in Sunspear, with or without a guard, but she did not seem to realize it yet. "I am well, thank you," Sansa said quietly. "I am happy that Prince Doran is returned." She didn't look happy, but Oberyn decided not to argue with her. "The very sight of you will delight my brother's eyes," he assured her. "You could scarcely be lovelier, and anyone can see that you are strong and well. Doran could desire nothing more." Sansa flushed slightly, perhaps even smiled a bit, but she continued to keep her eyes trained on the ground. All at once, the gates to the outer ward swung open. Doran's litter began its slow ascent up the first flight of stairs, to where his household awaited him. The litter was surrounded by figures on horseback, one of them a small girl whose golden curls escaped the long orange veil protecting her fair skin from the sun. Oberyn took 2 long strides forward, then fell to one knee. The rest of the crowd followed suit. The litter came to a halt, Arya Hotter helped Doran down, and Doran, leaning heavily on his walking stick, hobbled slowly, stiffly forward. He paused, smiling down on the small crowd gathered to greet him. Then his eyes fell on Oberyn. Oberyn leapt to his feet and embraced Doran with arms flung wide, kissing his cheek. "Brother," he said. "You look well." "Do I?" said Doran. There was a gentle irony in his voice, but his expression was fond. "You look better than I expected," Oberyn amended. "Especially after 2 weeks amongst the lions, and another 3 weeks at sea." He wasn't lying. The fact that Doran was able to walk, even with the aid of a stick, was more than Oberyn had hoped for. Doran accepted this with a nod and a sigh. "I will not pretend that I am not most grateful to be home once more." He started to say something else, but then his eyes lit on something just past Oberyn's shoulder. Oberyn watched as the weariness in Doran's expression gave way to wonder, relief, and a hint of trepidation. Sansa, Oberyn realized. There was a proper order in which the Prince of Dawn ought to receive those who were awaiting him, but as Doran gestured for all to rise, Oberyn took it on himself to lift Sansa to her feet. He placed a careful hand on her back, guiding her forward, and presented her to Doran like she was his own hand-picked welcome home gift. "Lady Sansa," Doran breathed, his eyes moving over her with a strange hunger. She curtsied, and Doran kissed her hand, enclosing it in both of his, as though to guard something precious. "Can it really be you?" Sansa flushed furiously. She was no longer so ashen as she had been when first Oberyn met her, especially with the sun turning her pale skin ruddy, but most days she looked fragile, still, to his eyes. Yet in this instant, there was more life in her face and features than Oberyn had ever glimpsed before. Even her eyes were bright, shimmering with unshed tears. If not for the soft, sweet smile on her lips, Oberyn would have thought her completely overwhelmed. "My lady," Doran continued, speaking too quietly for any but the 3 of them to hear. "All these long weeks with no news of you, I could not help fearing the worst. Yet here you stand before me, as lovely and whole as the maiden herself. I cannot tell you what joy this brings me." Oberyn blinked. He wasn't surprised by the sentiments, had he not only moments before told Sansa what Doran would feel when he saw her. But he was fairly stunned by the fact that Doran had actually given them voice. For a man so sparing with his words, this was waxing poetic indeed. Oberyn could not help but wonder at it. "I hope that your voyage was a peaceful one," Doran added, sounding a little more like himself. "And that you had all you required for your comfort." "The journey was indeed peaceful, my prince," Sansa said softly. "And I had every comfort, by your own gracious generosity." "No. That was no generosity on my part. Not when I am repaid tenfold to see you well and safe, here in mine own home." By Sansa's own admission, she and Doran had spent but little time together in the capital. Yet anyone looking at them now would think they had been boon companions for many a month. It had been a long time since even Arianne had looked upon Doran with the tenderness Oberyn saw in Sansa's features. Arianne was not even present just now, she had remained in the palace to oversee preparations for the welcoming feast. Doran gave Sansa's fingers a last squeeze, and Oberyn would swear that he surrendered her hand back to her, keeping only with the greatest reluctance. When Sansa stepped back into line, a strange shadow crossed Doran's face, grief, Oberyn thought, though what had inspired it, he could not guess. Princess Myrcella. The riders had dismounted when Doran's litter came to a halt, and at the prince's beckoning, the small girl with the golden curls under an orange veil stepped smartly to his side. "At long last, I may present my family to you. This is mine only brother, Prince Oberyn of Dorne, and the 4 ladies you see just behind him are my nieces, his daughters, the ladies Oberyn, Nymeria, Tyon, and Sarilla." Oberyn glanced over his shoulder just long enough to be certain that everyone was curtsying, even Sarilla, who had put aside her book at last. Then he made his own low bow. "Princess," he said, "my daughters and I are overjoyed to see you safely arrived. You are most welcome to Sunspear." Myrcella Baratheon curtsied. A pretty little girl of 9 or 10, Flanked by her scepter and a man of the Kingsguard, she was very like her mother, to the best of Oberyn's recollection. After all, the last time he'd laid eyes on the Queen, she was a child almost Myrcilla's age. But though Myrcilla had her mother's golden curls and high cheekbones and green eyes, the expression she wore, one of bright, friendly curiosity, mingled with excited pleasure, made her look as unlike proud, haughty Cersei Lannister as Oberyn was to the Kingslayer. Oberyn found himself winking at the child, and grinned when she suppressed a giggle. "And this young man, standing next to his uncle, is your own betrothed, my son," Prince Tristan Doran added. Oberyn could practically feel the nervous tension radiating from his nephew, but Tristan managed to step forward and make his bow without tripping or otherwise disgracing himself. "Princess Myrcilla," Tristan said. His voice hardly cracked at all. "I have long looked forward to meeting you." "As have I you, my prince," said Myrcilla promptly. She then proceeded to stare at Tristan for a long moment, with a lack of self-consciousness that only a child of 9 or 10 could manage without appearing rude. Tristan seemed unnerved at first, but when he offered her a hesitant smile, Myrcilla promptly blushed and grinned back. Soon the two children were beaming at each other, and Oberyn found his tension giving way to pleased satisfaction. Doran, too, was watching them with a softness in his eyes that Oberyn had not glimpsed for many years, not since Elia's death, perhaps. "And of course, Princess," said Doran, when it appeared that Myrcilla and Tristan were like to stand there smiling at each other for the rest of the afternoon, "you will remember your old companion, Lady Sansa of House Stark." Sansa lifted her head to gaze upon Myrcilla, and Oberyn, attuned by now to every nuance of her body language, saw Sansa's shoulders grow rigid. Yet when she spoke, there was only kindness in her voice. "It is good to see you again," Princess Sansa said, very softly. "I hope the voyage agreed with you." "We saw dolphins," said Myrcilla brightly, her smile not dimming in the least, as though Sansa were an old friend, not her family's former hostage. Sansa blinked, then she laughed a little. "We saw dolphins too. And a whale, I believe." The princess began to speak of other wonders she had glimpsed on her voyage, giant sea turtles, something the sailors had insisted was a mermaid. Yet Sansa, Oberyn could see clearly, was not really listening. For courtesy's sake, she was trying to appear attentive, but her eyes kept flickering over to the man in the white cloak standing at Myrcilla's shoulder. Curious, Oberyn found himself looking as well. The knight of the Kingsguard who had accompanied his princess to Dorne was visibly squirming. He wasn't returning Sansa's nervous glances, but he was being so careful not to look at her that he might as well have been staring openly. Suddenly, understanding flashed upon Oberyn like a bolt from the sky. It wasn't Myrcilla who was discomfiting Sansa, it was the knight. Oberyn heard Daemon's voice as if it were whispering in his ear, "The king ordered his Kingsguard to beat her." Oberyn sucked in a breath so low and sibilant it that was nearly a hiss. Before he quite knew what he was doing, he took a quick, reflexive step forward, coming to stand in between Sansa and the man in white. "And what have we here?" said Oberyn, grinning with all his teeth. "A noble knight of the Kingsguard, come all this way to guard his princess. You are very welcome to Dorne, I am sure. Your name, sir?" The knight straightened uncomfortably before making his bow. "Prince Oberyn. I am Sir Aris Oakurt, if it please you." "Not Sir Meryn, then." Oberyn relaxed slightly. And yet, had any of the Kingsguard not beaten Sansa at the butcher boy's command? Maybe 1 or 2 had escaped that duty, but not, Oberyn thought, Sir Aris. It was plain just to look at him that he was guilty. Perhaps Sansa's presence in Dorne had not been made known to him before he set out with his princess. Perhaps this hapless knight had believed he was leaving his guilt behind him in King's Landing, along with all those who might accuse him. Before these dark thoughts could take deeper root, however, Tyenn stepped forward to claim a niece's privilege and kissed Doran's brow. "Uncle," she said, "I am sure you are weary. Shall we go in, so you can rest before the feast tonight?" Doran gave her a grateful smile. If he had read any significance into Oberyn's exchange with Sir Aris, it was not obvious to Oberyn. Yes, rest would be most welcome. He gave Tyenn's hand a fond squeeze, then looked to Oberyn. "Brother, if you would be so good." Oberyn was always willing to assist his brother, but he did not like to leave Sansa just then. He looked at the girl behind him, then at Sir Aris, and before he could think of an excuse to keep them far away from one another, Doran spoke again. Sir Aris, Septafaela, my seneschal will show you the way to the princess's chambers, Doran said. I will not be long in Sunspear. Duty calls me to the water gardens within the week, so my own apartments in the Sun Tower will be given over for Myrsila's use. Oberyn gave Doran a sharp glance. Did his brother know, or had he merely guessed, that Oberyn had temporarily bestowed Sansa in the Spear Tower, a floor above his own chambers? The Sun Tower was a fair distance from its twin. There was little likelihood of any member of Myrsila's household encountering Sansa by chance, so long as they remained ensconced there. As Oberyn stepped forward to give Doran his shoulder to lean on, he glanced back over his shoulder and caught Daemon's gaze. He flicked his eyes in Sansa's direction, and Daemon needed no further instruction. Daemon shouldered his way through the crowd and offered Sansa his arm. As the seneschal began to issue directions to the servants, Daemon and Sansa slipped away, leaving Oberyn free to devote his whole attention to Doran. I owe you a debt, brother, said Doran, as they began their laborious trek towards the palace doors. When I charged you with bringing Lady Sansa alive to Sunspear, I feared I had burdened you with an impossible task. Truly, were you so uneasy? Oberyn frowned. I attempted to convey my assurances that all would be well. Granted, he had written more from fierce determination than from genuine confidence, but Doran didn't know that. You did, and that was some comfort. Doran winced as they crested the top of the stairs. Yet you told me a different story than any I had heard before. Lord Tyrion gave me to understand that the Lady Sansa's injuries were of the most minor sort, and I knew no better, until I heard otherwise from you. I see. Oberyn considered his words. Doran would not want to be spared, yet there seemed little point grieving his brother by explaining in detail all that Sansa had suffered. Then, in truth, her injuries were grievous, and she will bear the marks of them all her life. But she is recovered now. You need not fear for her any longer. Doran absorbed this expressionlessly. There was a portion of your letter that I found most mysterious. The final lines, what was it Lady Sansa said to you, to make you write as you did? Oberyn had to cast his mind back many weeks to recall what he had written Doran in the conclusion of his letter. Ah, yes, he said. Sansa offered to release us from her betrothal to Quentyn. The scars, she thought, perhaps. Doran shook his head, needing to hear no more. Poor maid, he whispered. Melorio once said to me, many years ago, that beauty was apt to be a curse as well as a blessing. I wonder if she was not correct. Sansa is beautiful still, said Oberyn, a little stiffly. Certainly, she is. He did not speak again until they reached his solar, where Caliot was waiting for them. The Maester offered Doran potions for his pain, but Doran waved them away and set Hotter to guard the door. Thus, Oberyn found himself alone with his brother for the first time in months. He had wished for nothing else since his own return to Sunspear, yet now, Oberyn found that he did not quite know what to say. A toast, he suggested after a moment, moving to the sideboard. To celebrate the betrothal of both your younger sons, and to the sisters of kings. A mighty coup, I should think. It was foolishness, and you know it, said Doran, though he accepted a goblet of strong wine all the same. Myrsila's betrothal was one matter. But I had no business claiming Sansa Stark for Dorne. Even if Quentyn does not succeed in his errand. Oberyn knew his nephew as well as Doran knew his son. Quentyn would succeed in his quest, or perish in the attempt. In either case, he would not return to Dorne unwed. I am sure you had your reasons, said Oberyn mildly. Oh, yes. I had reasons aplenty. Perhaps Sansa told you of them, or if not she, then Sir Daemon. Sansa said but little. Oberyn snorted. But yes, Daemon was most forthcoming. All the concessions which my Lord of Lannister offered in the betrothal agreement for Princess Myrcella will be honored. Doran held the wine goblet loosely, as though he cared not at all whether it should spill. A permanent seat on the small council is reserved for me, or my deputy. And in time, we will have justice for Elia. In time, Oberyn snorted. They keep a different sort of time in King's Landing if they think 17 years not time enough. They would no doubt have kept us waiting for another 17 years, if they could. But after the king. Doran's hand tightened into a fist. His knuckles were red and swollen, and Oberyn knew that it hurt him even to grip a quill, yet his hand did not relax. The situation altered somewhat after what was done to Sansa, he said, after a pause. Oberyn blinked. Strange, that he had not considered Sansa's injuries in that light, as much a diplomatic matter, as an insult to her person. But that was why Doran was ruling prince, not him. Doran saw all angles, all injuries, all slights. When I offered Quentyn to Sansa, no dowry was mentioned, nor did I demand one. Doran continued, gazing into the middle distance, his eyes lighting on something past the glass doors of his balcony. Sansa's life was her dowry. I saw that the instant I arrived at the doors of the throne room and saw Meryn Trant beating her. Oberyn's own hand tightened around the stem of his goblet. Yet, despite everything, he smiled. I knew Doran would learn his name. Yet, the life of the daughter of Eddard Stark was a sufficient prize for me. I did not haggle for her. By the end of my first day in King's Landing, the betrothal contract was drawn up, signed and sealed. Copies were sent to every great house in Westeros. Upon that instant, Sansa ceased to be a hostage. She became, instead, my ward. Doran's nostrils flared. She was my ward when King Joffrey ordered his Kingsguard to subdue Sir Mors and Sir Alliser, who were guarding her chamber door as she slept. She was my ward when the king stood over her bed in the darkness and tossed a burning torch onto the bedclothes beside her. Oberyn swallowed hard and sank slowly onto the chaise next to the sideboard. I learned all the truth of the matter, you see, in the days after I wrote to you. Doran's voice was as dry as the desert sand, and his smile was drier still. It was essential to know the truth, you see. Every betrothal comes with concessions. But the attempted murder of my ward, my own son's promised bride, this required something more. Not concession. Restitution. Oberyn leaned his elbows on his knees and gazed up at his brother. And what manner of restitution was granted? Names, for one. Doran drank deeply of his strong wine. 2 names. Sir Amory Lorch, for Rhaenys. And Sir Gregor Clegane, for Elia and Aegon. Oberyn never knew that he was capable of sitting so still, when all his inward being was stirred to revolt. Names are not heads, he said. Amory Lorch is with Lord Tywin's host in the Riverlands, and Gregor Clegane is, abroad. As one of his final acts as Hand of the King, Eddard Stark stripped Clegane of his titles and lands, pronounced him accursed and attainted, and sent his own men to serve the king's justice on him. The king's justice, said Oberyn roughly. Stark justice, I call it. His mouth suddenly dry, he drained his goblet. I have heard it said that, 17 years ago, Eddard Stark was the only man of Robert Baratheon's company who cried for justice on Elya's murderers. I did not believe it then. Yet now. We ought not judge children by their fathers, said Doran. Yet all men judge fathers by their children. He sighed. Be that as it may, Lord Stark's men were ordered arrested after he himself was confined to the Black Cells. None of that company have been seen since, and Clegane is still at liberty. But Lord Tyrion agreed that some more earnest effort was needed to apprehend him, and a man of the Kingsguard volunteered to lead the hunt. A man of the Kingsguard. Oberyn snorted. Those same men of chivalry who beat Sansa with their own swords. The one man of the Kingsguard who never did. Doran corrected him softly. Sandor Clegane. Oberyn gaped. You set the Hound after his own brother. It is the Hound we have to thank for Sansa's life. He came upon the king at his crimes, and it was he who put the fire out and informed Lord Tyrion in time for Sansa to make good her escape. I was informed later that the Hound has a peculiar terror of fire, so we must presume that he feels some particular loyalty to Sansa. The king was not best pleased with him for his interference, however, and Lord Tyrion implied that Clegane was only too grateful to leave the capital for a time and go in search of his brother. There is little love between them, I was told. Oberyn recalled his thoughts from the outer ward. There may have been 1 or 2 who escaped that chore. Yet of all the men who wore the white, Sandor Clegane would have been the man Oberyn thought most likely to take pleasure in carrying out the king's brutal orders. What of Sir Amory, said Oberyn, half-dazed. A slightly smaller company of our own good Dornishmen, led by Jaenessa Blackmont, has set out in search of him. Oberyn's eyes widened. Jaenessa Blackmont was formidable, but to his knowledge, she had never trained at arms. Elia was something of a heroine of hers when she was small, Doran explained. Sir Desild accompanies Jaenessa as her sworn shield. Suddenly, The stunned paralysis which had kept Oberyn fastened to his seat gave way to a surge of furious energy. "I should be among them," he snarled, half to himself. "No. Sansa needed you. And I need you, here, with me, now. We have discussed this many times before." They'd argued about it 1,000 times if they'd mentioned it once. Oberyn was obedient to his brother's will as prince, but even after so many years he still was not resigned to it. "So it seems that we stand to gain much from Sansa's suffering." Oberyn gave his brother a bitter smile. "Were any restitutions made for her comfort, I wonder? Do you think me heartless?" Doran's tone was bleak. "Of course I made provisions for Sansa. To begin with, we are all of us excused from attending the king's wedding. His betrothal to Margaery Tyrell was announced the day I departed the capital. They are to wed 4 months hence. My gout will take a sudden turn for the worse around that time, however, and my family will not be parted from my side whilst I am so ill." "No, of course we will not," said Oberyn, with a twitch of the lip. "As to the rest," Doran averted his gaze. "The rest may not be so much to Sansa's comfort, after all, but it pertains to her." Oberyn felt a chill. "What is it?" Doran wheeled his chair the rest of the way to the window, and by the way he gazed out at the Shadow City, Oberyn knew he was wishing himself back in the Water Gardens, with the children playing before him. Oberyn had seen him sit thus, gazing down at the gardens for an entire day and a night once. It was the day they told him of Elia and the children. "Sansa Stark has been confirmed as Eddard Stark's lawful heir, the Lady of Winterfell in her own right, should King Robb fall in battle." Oberyn frowned. "I knew they had disinherited King Robb, much good may that do them. But Sansa has 2 brothers else. One Brandon, and one, Rickard, I believe. Small boys, too young to be tainted by their brother's treason." Doran shook his head without turning his face from the window. "No," he said heavily. "King Robb lives, but not Prince Brandon, nor Prince Rickon." A heavy weight filled Oberyn's stomach. "Word reached the capital shortly after your departure. Winterfell has been taken by a host of Ironborn, led by Balon Greyjoy's heir. He killed the 2 little princes, and hung their bodies outside the gates." Doran's voice was thick with grief, but he plunged on. "He will not keep Winterfell long, however. It was a foolish exploit, the vainglorious act of a young, unseasoned warrior. Northmen are loyal, and the strength of the Ironborn derives from the sea. The Boltons of the Dreadfort will reclaim Winterfell in Robb's name soon enough. Yet, there are dark rumors from the Riverlands. Robb Stark is a brilliant battle commander, but at the end of the day, he is a boy of 16. We must not pin our hopes on his victory." Oberyn leaned against the sideboard again, head spinning. "If Robb Stark falls in battle, all the North will proclaim Sansa Lady of Winterfell. Many will likewise proclaim her queen in the North." Oberyn shook his head. "Gods be good, Doran. You said the girl came with no dowry. It seems to me she comes with half of Westeros." "It is no jesting matter," said Doran sharply. "You must see how this changes our position. 5 weeks ago, the Lannisters gave me a hostage. She no longer held any value for them, not after King Robb refused to trade her for the Kingslayer. They scarcely cared what became of her after Lord Tyrion gave her into your hands. Now everything is different. The North remembers, and in the Riverlands, they continue to fly Stark banners. The man Sansa marries may well become the single most powerful lord in all of Westeros." Oberyn blinked, then filled his wine goblet again. "I'm surprised they didn't ask you to give her back," he said. "Oh, they did. Numerous times, with sweeter and sweeter inducements. But how, I asked them, could I assent to Sansa's return to King's Landing, when she had barely escaped with her life? What was to stop the king from assaulting her again? They soon ceased to trouble me on the subject." Doran smiled distantly. "But now that I am come again to Dorne, I expect ravens to arrive shortly, taking up the theme again. They will continue to harp upon it until Sansa marries, I expect." Oberyn sipped his wine slowly. "We pledged ourselves to wed the dragons before it was known that there were dragons," he said. "We took a certain person's cause as our own, because he was the nearest kin of royal blood to our sister's children. But he is dead now, and there is no telling whether his sister will look on our suit with favor. Perhaps. Perhaps, said Doran, with weary finality. I have thought of nothing else, these 3 weeks I have been at sea. Her brother was a friendless babe when you signed the accords with his guardian. But he is dead now, and she is neither a babe, nor friendless. She has dragons, and men the world over seek her favor. What can Quentyn offer her, amidst so many suitors? Family. Oberyn shrugged. She has none. Nor has she friends, not in Westeros. She has dragons. She will have friends in plenty, if she is wise enough to tell them from her foes. It may be that she will refuse my son her hand, yet still, she may accept a different sort of alliance. One that would leave Quentyn free to marry when he returned to Dorne. Oberyn frowned. Will you write to him? I would rather he should write to me first, to tell me how matters stand. Doran sighed heavily. Yet I fear that even should I write him this very day, his homecoming would be too late for our purposes. When I took Sansa from the Lannisters, I thought only to save the life of an innocent maid, a worthless thing, in the eyes of many. Instead, I find myself possessed of a queen in waiting. If we are to keep her, we must act swiftly. Either Quentyn must return with all speed, or I must arrange a different match for Sansa. You know how I dislike hasty action, but circumstances force my hand. Oberyn pushed away from the sideboard and walked over to the window, to stand next to his brother. She does not yet know that her brothers are dead, he said. No, I spoke of it to no one at sea, so that no one might let it slip by accident on our arrival. I mean to be the one to tell her. She is strong enough in body, but in spirit, Oberyn sighed. I would ask that you not speak to her of that and of her marriage in the same breath. Give her time to mourn before her suitors come calling. Of course I would not, Doran let out a long sigh, hinting at his frustration. When I leave for the Water Gardens, Sansa will come with me. I will take the time to know her before I decide what her fate must be. You take an eager interest in her welfare, said Oberyn, not disapprovingly. Doran shut his eyes, and abruptly he looked 10 years older than he really was. When he opened his eyes again, the newly pronounced lines around his eyes and mouth did not fade. Had you stood where I stood, said Doran, the day I came to the capital, had you heard and seen all that I did, I would have poisoned every last one of them in their sleep, no doubt, said Oberyn, his tone one of forced flippancy. No, said Doran, with chilling certainty. You would have died there, fighting all 6 of the Kingsguard by yourself. This, I know. Had I my legs again, I would have been tempted to do the same. Oberyn felt a chill rack his body, from head to toe. Even when Doran was young and whole, even when he was a name to be reckoned with in the lists and a warrior feared by all those who came to cross blows with him, Oberyn had never heard him speak so. Should you not rest? Oberyn said mildly. Surely it was the strain of his long voyage that had turned his mild brother so warlike. Yes, said Doran, sounding once again like himself, weary, laden with heavy burdens. But first, I must speak with Sansa. She cannot be ignorant of her brother's fate when she attends the feast tonight. Someone may know, someone may speak of it to her. It would be better if she were excused from attending the feast. Oberyn found himself protesting. That, said Doran, I will leave to Sansa to decide. Chapter 9. Notes. You guys keep saying that you like Doran's POV best, so here, have 7,000 plus words of Doran being Doran. By the way, I cannot tell you what joy your comments bring to my life. I've been having a hard time lately, life stuff, mental health stuff, and sometimes I get a comment from one of you that just changes my day. For whatever it's worth, a lot of the stuff that I write about Sansa and her reactions to trauma come from a very personal place for me, and I know that's also true for a lot of people who seek out stories that deal with such themes explicitly, so if reading this story makes you want to reach out somehow, please don't hesitate to comment, or even find my Tumblr Ask box. Chapter text. Doran. The children who played in the Water Gardens were all under the age of 10, naked, carefree, oblivious to the limitations of their own rank or birth, or the high-born status of their playmates. Sansa was, just barely, too old to join them. Yet ever since she came to the palace a week ago, she had walked in the gardens almost every day, skirting around the edges of the pools, searching for soft, shaded spots amongst the trees, where the children's roars of victory and shrieks of defeat were muffled by the greenery and hedges. Sometimes, she came with a book in her hand, other times with a piece of embroidery to stitch. More often, she brought nothing with her but her own thoughts, and sat quietly in her secluded refuge from dawn to dusk, gazing out at the sea. Every day, Doran watched her. He watched all of the children, while he sat and made his plans and read his correspondence, but more often than not he found himself examining the bowers of green for a telltale flash of red hair. Whenever he spied Sansa, reading her books and working at her embroidery, a fond smile stole over his face. She was making a brave effort to occupy her mind, to steel herself against the poison of deep grief, and he admired her for it. But when she did not read, when her hands lay empty in her lap and her eyes gazed out upon nothingness, Doran found it difficult to concentrate on business or attend to his letters. He should be doing more for her, he thought. Not that princes were by nature skilled in the art of counseling grieving ladies. Yet Doran stood in the place of her father now, in the place of all her family.